Good morning. I'll make it 10 o'clock, so welcome to this formal meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Councillor Adam Stokes, to my right, is also present. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public watching this live. As the meeting is being streamed in the usual way, I'd like to remind you all that your comments will remain accessible online and can be reported by the media. Regarding health and safety, there is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park and wait there. Meeting etiquette. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting. Also, may I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by my Vice Chairman. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live. Then press again when you finish your contribution. We'll now move on to the formal agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, replacement councillors. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor King and we have Councillor Hassan as a replacement. And if I can also note Glenn Garrett's apologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 is declaration of council's interests. Do any members wish to declare any interest, please? No, I'm looking around, none declared, so thank you for that. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee held on the 31st of January. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Previous meeting minutes can be found on pages 5 to 14 of the agenda pack. I'm going to take those as read. Can I have a proposer, please? So Vice Chairman's proposed, a seconder. Councillor Danny seconded. We'll now vote on that. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? And finally, any abstentions? Got 2 abstentions. Thank you. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. I have no personal announcements to make today. We have a busy agenda today, therefore I ask that officers take their reports presented today as read and only summarise key points and what support is required by this committee. Members are also reminded of the importance of succinct questions and contributions that will allow for efficient and effective use of the time allocated for each discussion. Moving on to the Executive Council announcements. Do we have any Executive Council announcements? No Executive Support Council announcements? No, and none on Teams. Okay. And finally, are there any senior officer announcements, please? No? Looking around? None. Okay, thank you. We'll then turn to the agenda proper, agenda item 5, which is the service level performance reporting against the success framework 2022-2023, quarter 3. This item can be found on pages 15 to 38 of the agenda pack and sets out the performance of the Tier 2 service level performance measures. The actions of this committee are that we're invited to review and comment on the contents of this report. The report will be presented by, I understand Martin Parker's not here today, so I think you're taking that one, Nicole. And Will, yeah. Also Lee Surdifield, Lee's here, yeah. Mark Baxter and Stephen Batchelor, yeah. Okay. To make this an efficient presentation, we'll take the questions at the end of each update. Please be reminded that the report should be taken as read. So over to you, Nicole, I believe, to start.
Thank you. It'd actually be me, yes.
Okay.
So apologies that Martin isn't able to join us. Rather than me go through the report and show that obviously I don't have Martin's excellent knowledge of this area, I wanted to see if there are any questions, and if there are any questions, I will, of course, ensure that they go back to Martin and his answers are shared with the committee for consideration.
Okay, so we may not be able to give a conclusive answer to those today. You'll
Not
come back
today,
to
I'm
us, yeah.
afraid. no.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Anything you want to say about the report?
No, literally just open it up for questions, thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, is there any members wishing to ask questions on that particular item? Yes, but the first part of item 5, yeah. Okay. We're all clear on that? Okay, thank you. We'll go over to Lee then next, yeah?
Okay, so just to add a bit of context to the report, in terms of the number of organisations supported, that's now on target. Quarter 1 was slightly behind, so VCS have recovered the lost ground there. The usual training courses remain popular in terms of funding, advice and readiness, with £550,000 of funding being brought in so far this year to community organisations. And the grant finder page remains positive. There's 89 grant applications open on that and 59 closed opportunities, so a good throughput of activity there. Again, in terms of access to volunteering, that is on target with over 400 opportunities live. We're currently working through a review of volunteering with VCS, along with colleagues in health and the DWP, and that's looking at both volunteering as access to work as a pathway, but also supporting those with additional needs into volunteering opportunities. We're due to bring a paper in June to the committee, which will expand further on the volunteering activities that are taking place, so we can provide some additional context in terms of those ambitions as we move into a future meeting, but nothing beyond that to add to the report.
Okay, Lee, thank you. Any questions on that? For clarity, this is on the page 34 and 35, I believe, and 36. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, with the coronation coming up, how our volunteering efforts are going to be linked into what the King has asked for with the volunteering day on the Monday. Thank you.
I will take that away and I'll circulate a note on that. I'll talk to VCS. I'm not sure that VCS directly doing anything unless Heritage and others are.
Okay, Will.
Yes, I'm pleased to say that what we are doing as part of the coronation event at Lincoln Castle, we are talking with some groups to try and have a volunteer driving activity on at least one of the days.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you. I noticed that with the volunteer organisations that we give support in lots of different ways, including governance. In the past, I've seen a volunteer organisation go to the wall because of failure to carry out good governance requirements. What input do we have with these organisations that we support when it comes to their governance? Thank you.
So VCS have some standard terms and conditions that they can support organisations through. So they provide advice in terms of setup and configuration of those entities. They run a series of governance courses that people can go through, and that's everything from kind of roles of trustees through to safeguarding activities and expectations. Obviously, they run the DBS process for those voluntary organisations. So they tailor that to needs at various points. But I can get you a comprehensive list of their offer if that would help.
Okay, thank you. No further comments on that part. We'll go to Chief Fire Officer next then, Mark. And for clarity, I think that's on pages 17 to 26 of Agenda Item 5.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pepper. I'm just going to hand over to Ryan, who heads our performance area, but obviously we're both available for questions at the end of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. There's a few areas of the report I will draw members of this committee's attention to. We are exceeding our response time targets. These response time targets are made up of the time taken to handle the call. So that's from time of call from a member of public through our control centre. It includes the mobilising time for our crews getting into the fire engine. So clearly our on-call crews take 4 or 5 minutes to attend the fire station, and then the drive time 2 incidents. We currently have a performance target of achieving average response to dwelling fires within 11 minutes. We're currently achieving 8 minutes and 55 seconds. What that does do is demonstrates that we've got the right resources in the right places, so we're accurately able to predict where we expect those vulnerable communities and those people who are most likely to be at risk of fire, and that our resources are closest centred to those areas. We have a target around community safety, home fire safety visits. I know we have had a bit of conversation at this committee before, but it's worthy of note and a reminder that the target of 10,000 for the year is an aspirational target. We're currently achieving 50% of that target against Q3. The desire around the aspirational target was to deliberately set a target which was to engage a system-wide approach to problem solving and avoid the risk of incremental target increases year on year and the demotivation effect that has on staff when we keep changing the goalposts every single year. So we've been really clear that over a 3 or 4 year period we want to see our safe and well activity increase to circa 10,000 safe and well checks. In order to do that, we need good quality information coming from partners within the county council. We need good systems within our organisation to handle that data. And we need to structure our response arm of the organisation to make sure we can fundamentally deliver that. I'm pleased to see that the stations on the front end have stepped up to that, and we're seeing some of our stations now delivering in excess of 50 safe and well visits per month, which is ultimately their part of achieving that target. We do have some work to do with regard to some of our systems in other areas, and we are working really closely, particularly with adult care at the minute, to get some really high quality data around specific individuals who have elements we would consider to be vulnerable and increase their susceptibility to fire, so we can go and proactively conduct safe and well visits in those areas. I did promise the committee that I'd bring some information regarding our performance compared to the rest of the sector. I have been able to do that. The data relates to 2021 and 2022. I've compared data to the other 15 predominantly rural fire and rescue services. There are some problems with that data which I will explain in a bit more detail, but it is probably the best peer data that we've got to date. In 2019-20, which was the last COVID-free year, you remember the lockdown happened towards the middle of March of that year. The rest of the sector of the comparable fire and rescue services were delivering circa 7,000 safe and well visits for those comparable organisations. Lincolnshire were delivering 3,500, so about 50% of our peer group average. We are currently on track to deliver 69% of the peer group average, so there will be a significant improvement this year. It doesn't bring us in line with our aspirational target, but it does compare well with the rest of the sector. I did say there were some problems modelling it against that data set. We have a very different delivery model compared to other fire and rescue services in the sector, specifically our Lincolnshire crewing system, which has crews actively crewing the fire stations during the daytime hours and then responding to alerters on a close proximity basis in the evenings. This is distinct from a traditional 2 days, 2 nights duty system where there are firefighters on fire stations 24 hours a day. What the latter of those two duty systems means is that a lot of training activity can be pushed into a night shift. A lot of equipment testing and training can be pushed into a night shift. Whereas for our close proximity crewing systems, all of that work has to be done during the daytime hours, so it does produce a time pressure on some of those staff. We have looked at another way of comparing the model that we have, which looks at the cost of home safety check, and we are certainly one of the cheapest provisions of fire and rescue services in the UK in terms of the cost of delivering safe and well visits to the community. I know that's a lot of information for members of this committee to take on, so I'm happy to take any questions at that point.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone wishing to comment? Councillor, Mr. Clark.
Thanks for the details that you've given us. I remember in a previous committee meeting we discussed appliances trying to get to certain areas within the cities or some of the towns because of irresponsible parking. Have you had any issues of that recently? Thank you.
Parking is a hot topic all of the time. We do a lot of work through social media, and we also leaflet areas that are particularly known for that. I'm not aware of any specific issues that have caused us with delays getting to fires recently, but it's certainly something I can look into and bring back through to this committee. Certainly where we do miss our attendance standard, we do look into the reasons for that in some detail and make sure that we have systems in place to address it where we can do.
Okay, thank you. On page 19, it mentions there somewhere we are currently trialling a new allocation and recording process in each division with a view to rolling out to all divisions by the end of February. Has that now been rolled out as we're now in March?
Yes, it has. So we trialled it over at Louth in the east of the county, or the northeast of the county, and it has seen some success in the time. It's the administrative burden really that goes with recording safe and well visits. So we previously had a system whereby when crews were allocated jobs, if you like, they went onto the system, and each individual job, irrespective of the outcome, had to be recorded separately on the system, which did cause an administrative burden. So if crews knocked on a door 3 times and was unable to get a response, the same bureaucracy went into recording, in effect, a non-home safety visit as actually capturing the details for a safe and well visit. So we've reduced that administrative burden. We collate that data separately, which means that crews now have more time to actually conduct safe and well visits rather than administering non-safe and well visits, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. On a similar note, last time you reported to us, you was quite confident that you could catch up and meet the target. What's the levels of confidence now?
I suspect we will probably achieve circa 50% of that target. I don't think we have the capacity to catch up this year. As I say, it was an aspirational target, and I think some of that messaging has been lost in the translation. Our crews are increasing the amount of safe and wells they are delivering per quarter on each occasion as we learn more about what's preventing us hitting that target. But no, I don't think we will get close to hitting that target this year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that detailed report. As always, very good and interesting to read. I just really would like an update on the concern you have in the increase in grassland and stubble field secondary fires, and wonder what kind of pressure that's going to put on the service. Have you anticipated that? I know you'll have been looking at the data and you'll be prepared for that, but can you just tell me what kind of preparations you've taken with farmers for this in anticipation of where this is going to happen? Because you will have noticed, you will have looked at where it happened last year, so no doubt there'll be hot spots. Can you just give me an update on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, our response to this has been many and varied. So as you say, the number of wildfires we had last year was 300 more than we would normally have experienced, and is actually the bulk of the reason our number of fires overall is higher this year than it was in previous years. We are linked in with the National Fire Chiefs Council around wildfires, wildfire prevention and response to wildfires. In Lincolnshire, our wildfires are very different to the national problems with wildfires. So if you look in North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester, Lancashire, it's heathland fires. So fires over a very wide area taking a number of days, but they are individual fires, albeit some of them are multi-seated. The issue that we've had is we've had hundreds of much smaller scale fires. So our fires are very agricultural as opposed to heathland fires. This does present us with some slightly more discrete problems. We have changed the way we respond to those incidents, so we're much better at mobilising resources that were previously unavailable during spate areas. And we've also commissioned some work from the University of Lincoln to look at specifically the risk that we have within Lincolnshire. I think our response this year is going to be better. Prevention-wise, we're working with farmers, but ultimately we are very much at the mercy of the weather and farmers being able to get crops in over a shortened time period.
Sorry, yeah, and I think it's just worth to note there's been a really important piece of work that we've been doing with the National Farmers Union, and that's in regards to we've run a programme to ensure that we've got specially adapters that are allocated on all of our appliances, and also we've been engaging in a prevention programme that's we go out with National Farmers Union and deliver fire safety advice and also what to do in the event of a fire. Now, pulling that programme together means that actually we can access water bowsers and water courses directly and quickly. And we've seen tangible benefits of that, how we've been able to suppress fires far quicker. And actually it's also been recognised as national best practice that has been taken on by the NFU and are also now sharing that out in other areas within the country. So it's a bespoke piece of work that in partnership with with the NFU is absolutely making a difference in regards to protecting our farmers in our county, because we know that's a high risk area for us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark, followed by Councillor Key.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 25, on the item there on inspections, you note high risk sleeping, and you've done 110. I assume it's hospitals, care homes, student accommodation. Could you give me any other example of where you would inspect? Thank you.
I think in a nutshell, you've hit the nail on the head. That's ultimately where those high risks are. So we would class medium risk sleeping would be hotels, high risk would be hospitals, care homes, student accommodation.
Okay, Councillor Key.
I think Councillor Clark was looking over my shoulder because that was the same thing I was going to ask. But there was a second part to my question. Bearing in mind that's what the places are that you inspect, are you able to give us some examples of where failings have been found and the sorts of actions you've been able to take? Because obviously this is the thing that you hear on the news all the time, the cladding and all this sort of thing. And with multi-occupancy, obviously there's a big risk with these places. So just an example of where you've been able to take action. Thank you.
Yeah, so cladding is a very topical area of concern. We have to take a risk-based approach, as does the building owner, to remediating cladding. Clearly, we would want to see any flammable cladding removed from a building. And as such, post-Grenfell, we did a lot of work assessing the housing stock and the high-rise stock in the county. And as we find cladding, we've made sure that building owners are remediating against that. We are working currently with a building owner around some of the lower risk cladding. So it's not some of the high-pressure laminated cladding that was found in the Grenfell Tower tragedy. What we do when we find those is work with the building owner to decide how big the risk is. So is it a sleeping risk? Are the occupants likely to be, we would call it ambulant? So are they able to move themselves around the building, or are they non-ambulant? Is it a hotel type environment where you'd expect people typically to be able to evacuate themselves, or is it a hospital care home where they would need to have assistance getting out of the building? The building type that we're looking at the minute, it has ambulant people in it. The level of cladding is very small. The means of escape and the fire protection in the rest of the building is sound. So as such, that is a fairly low risk cladded building, very small amount of cladding. But even so, that building owner has put what we would call a waking watch. So in addition to the fire alarms in the building, there is also someone who will continually monitor the building on a 24-hour period to make sure that there is no instances of fire.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on something you said rather than in the report, actually, if that's okay, Ryan. It's to do with targets, and I noticed you talk about aspirational targets. And I think it's really good that you're doing that, because I've long had a bee in my bonnet about targets, because they can be incredibly destructive, especially when they're set externally without any concept of local conditions and things like that. But what I'm wondering, is there any facility within your structure, or how much facility within your structure is there to show that people are achieving steps towards, as in working towards? So if your target is 100 something and they achieve 50 something, but that is, is there a graded congratulations, if you like, and support for having achieved and stepped towards the aspirational target, so that it retains a positive effect? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That is incredibly important, and one of the reasons we didn't want this target to be punitive, and recognising the demotivating effect a continually moving goalpost has on staff. Certainly, and considering how we report this, the achievement of this aspirational target in future years to this committee, I think it's something that we need to reflect what we would expect to be a realistic incremental improvement year on year. Certainly, particularly in our East Division, staff there have changed the way they deliver home safety visits, and they are to be congratulated and are congratulated on their achievement of that. Of course, what we do have is different areas of the county have different problems in trying to achieve that target. There are areas in the East where we would expect to find residents at home during the day when we're knocking on doors. And it's a lot more predictable when those residents are going to be at home, whereas in the city of Lincoln, clearly there's a very different demographic, a lot more working age people where it's less easy to predict when they're likely to be at home, and of course they therefore move their activity around into the times of day to ensure that we're not always knocking on the door just after lunch, that we knock in the evenings, in the mornings, after schools have returned home, etc. So there are some very discrete differences of the way we're able to achieve that target across the county, and where we strike gold, if you like, and the crews are congratulated for that.
If I can just add on to that, just put it into context, and it's something that, as Ryan has quite rightly identified, we need to reflect on how we report on this, because I think what's probably important for the committee to understand is, as we are today, we've already improved on our highest target than we had for the last 5 years. So in regards to actually what is the objective we wanted to achieve was a continual improvement and an increase in regards to activity at a targeted high risk area. We are delivering on that. And I think that absolutely your point is really valid. We just need to ensure that people understand that, because actually in regard, looking just on binary numbers can be demotivating, but actually what we've done this year is to manage to increase productivity at the high risk areas, and actually it's the highest we've probably been for the last 5 years. So it has been a success in that element.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I do recall well, Mr. Stacey, you stated that hotels are medium risk and hospitals are high risk. Where do you put care homes? Because as far as I know, there is some care homes that have lifts inside, and there is people who smoke inside their rooms. Thank you.
It depends. It depends on the size of the care home and the structure of the care home. And of course, what we are being clear about is the difference between a generic risk, albeit being a care home, and the specific risk of an individual who lives within a care home or a care facility. In the same way that we can target our staff towards areas in the county where we would expect, on average, people to be at higher risk of having a fire, statistically speaking. But actually within those areas, there are people who are very much higher risk and very much lower risk. So it's very much, although we can look at care homes being generically higher risk, we then need to look at the residents within the care homes and target packages towards those individuals to make them individually safer within that setting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, well, it comes to my concern from one of the residents at Widham Court that LHP has removed some fire extinguishers on the corridor, so they left just some in the kitchen. And that made the residents of that building worried if there is a fire. So is there any interference from you guys with the LHP or any association? Thank you.
Certainly we would respond to any cause of concern that any resident had, and certainly I can take that away and have a look at it. The provision of fire extinguishers, of course, is complex, and we would expect them to put areas of risk. And in fact, we would tend to discourage residents of care homes from using fire extinguishers and actually make sure they're engineering their escape from the building and raising the alarm rather than trying to tackle the fire in perhaps an unsafe manner. But certainly we can have a look at that and make sure that there is adequate provision of fire extinguishers.
Okay, thank you. On page 21, if I can find it, you mentioned there's been an increase in the number of fires reported with an unknown cause. How certain or uncertain does the officer in charge have to be to make an unknown claim? I'm thinking now, if you can think of 2 or 3 reasons why that fire started, he could be in a dilemma and not wish to declare what caused it. Similarly, there could be a case where clearly didn't know what caused the fire, but I guess there's other occasions where pretty sure I know what caused that. So is there a level of, I don't know, I'm thinking practically now percentage terms, you know, if you're 75% sure, is that still unknown, or can that go as the cause? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a balancing act we're always trying to stay on the right side of. Clearly, fires are either deliberate or they're accidental. It's a pretty binary measure. When we come to performance reporting, we want to be able to report the causes so that we can identify trends, etc., etc. So when we are not able to categorically say either one way or the other, it sort of sits in that middle category. I mean, a good example would be where almost all evidence has been consumed by the fire. We had a number of fires this summer which were of indeterminate cause, some of the stubble fires. So while it is completely possible it was arson, it's also as probable that it was rays of light being focused through a piece of broken glass. So that we need to make sure we're recording it so that we can identify trends. And there's a risk. A number of years ago, if a fire, if we had a fire in a home where an individual had burnt cooking, at what point is that negligent because it's poor housekeeping versus accidental versus, and it's very difficult to predict state of mind, etc. What we need to be able to do is make sure that we can group those fires so that we can undertake preventative activity or indeed legislative enforcement activity, and we feel we're quite able to do that. Ultimately, it's on balance that we would make sure our commanders are doing it. What we don't want to do is yo-yo between saying that if you can't prove it's deliberate, then it's accidental, or indeed if you can't prove it's accidental, then it's deliberate. We do need that middle ground somewhere.
So it's sometimes a dilemma as to know what to record it as, so the unknown cause is the safest option.
We would rather it sit in one or the other, but
Yeah.
but also we don't want our statistics to be greatly skewed when there is a genuine indeterminate cause.
Okay, thank you. See no further questions for that part. The next one on my list, not necessarily in the agenda order, is Stephen Batcher, Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager. Steve, can you just tell us your part, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I won't do too much
No,
on this part
'cause we've
because
got
I've got the annual
Sure.
report coming up
Yeah.
afterwards, be slightly self-indulgent. But I'm pleased to report that the Q3 figures on both of our measures are lower than they've been for the previous 2 years, and that supports the direction of travel with the number of people being killed and seriously injured at the moment, with a slight reduction overall in 2022.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I'll mention it, Steve, whilst it's on the tip of my tongue, and I think I might have mentioned it before, but this table of statistical neighbours, I know Lincolnshire County Council yourselves hasn't come up with that category, it's beyond our control, but living on the county border of Lincs and Cams, I can see that Cams isn't on the table. I'm also aware that there's a high accident level in Kent, but for instance, Herefordshire, I note that their record is 1/5 of the amount of KSIs to Lincolnshire. Should they really be in the same table as us? Just want your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. we've been looking into this. It's been, those choices have been there for some time, so finding out how they were determined at the time has been quite difficult. We think it may well have been as part of the Department for Transport's rural demonstration project, but after previous comments from committee, I am trying to establish where that came from with a degree of certainty, and then also consider whether that still remains the most appropriate comparisons for us, or whether there's another way in which that should occur.
So it's something you're looking into?
It is, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. When I gave out the list of presenters at the start, I didn't mention Mark Keel. You've got a section in there, I noticed. Is there anything you wish to say at this point?
Yeah, only on the product safety figures that are there. The report does reference that we were waiting on some figures, further figures from some work that had been carried out. We've got those figures now in respect of a couple of businesses that we've had some ongoing work with across the year. In total, 9,000 items were removed across a number of visits, subject to suspension notices and improvement notices, basically. We've worked with the company where we can to get those products back into compliance, and around 7,000 of those have been checked now, relabelled, and are back on the market. And 1,000, mostly electrical items, have been removed from the market permanently now, and recalls have been issued to people who've purchased those. Working with the company, they've invested around £50,000 in improving their systems, so we're hopeful that that will avoid any future problems, and it's been a really good working relationship with them. We are just doing a little bit of follow-up work. We're waiting on a couple of test results to come back, but we're hopeful now that that is sorted, and it will obviously boost those figures for the Q3 quite significantly for safety sampling there.
Okay, thank you. Got a number of people wishing to speak. Councillor Danny, followed by Councillor Key, followed by Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I have touched on this topic before, but now it's getting more alarming about driving around Boston. A couple of weeks ago, I think the police stopped a driver, he had a car with no insurance, but the worst of that, he never had a driver license, and he was an EU member. Now, I can see like 6 o'clock in the morning in the town centre. I think Vauxhall Zafiras, I think maximum seats are 7, but they are carrying 8. There is a Bulgarian registered 6-seater, which takes people without seat belts. There is another one is Spanish, which is as well is a 6-seater, taking people without seat belts. So it's a big concern for me if we arrest one person without driver license, and I'm aware, and I did report some people driving without driver license and using their cars as taxis from and to airports. And I do understand you work a lot, very close with the police, but unfortunately I don't see that the police are doing a big work on this one, because it puts the life of other people in danger. And if one doesn't have driver license, or one drive an SUV with 6 seaters, none of them have a seatbelt, I tell you, I'm in a shock sometimes, because I report these things to the police around me in Boston. However, it's not much done, because they say they're going to do the job. So is there anything that you can push further for more controls on our highways? Because they go to work, they go to, from Boston, for example, to Anwick to work in the chicken factories, they go to Holbeach, food manufacturing around there. Is there anything we can do more to stop these things? Thank you.
I'm not sure this comes under you, Mark, but I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah.
No, it doesn't come under a trading standards remit. I can discuss it with Martin, quite happy to do that. And if it looks like there are unlicensed taxis being operated, then obviously we can speak to the district councils about taxi licensing and see if there's anything that they can do in that regard.
Okay. If that can be reported, we'll move on. So, Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. Mine is a trading standards question. It's to do with page 32, and it's a thing I bring up every time. And this is the number of food inspections, 22. And I remember last time, obviously, we said that this wasn't satisfactory. And I did actually ask about the liaison between the district councils and the county council. It wasn't quite minuted in detail, because obviously not everything can be minuted. But I've been thinking about this, and when the District Council Environmental Health visit a premises and it's unsatisfactory, there didn't seem to be a clear channel of communications to trading standards, because I have a food industry background, and I would have thought if a factory is failing on food safety, it's probably failing on trading standards matters as well. And there didn't seem to be very good communication between the two, or certainly it wasn't automatically reported to us. And I just wonder if any more thought has been given to that, and if you have anything else to say about 22 inspections, which is nothing for a county our size. Thank you.
So the 22 inspections are part of the highest risk premises that we put into our plan, but it's not the total food inspection work that we carry out. Those are the businesses that we've highlighted at the beginning of the year for an inspection. It is a lower number than the total that we carry out throughout the year. After the last meeting, I did go back and have a look and see how many we've done this year. And that was around the 150 mark, up from the 100. So there has been an increase this year with a couple of months left to go to add into that. So on the inspection front, that figure isn't the total amount that we're carrying out. In terms of liaison with the environmental health, we do have very good informal arrangements with them, and if they have concerns, particularly if they've noted anything trading standards related, they do report that to us, particularly around allergens and things like that, where we have a shared responsibility with the districts. They don't deal with it in isolation. They ask us to attend those premises, and we do that. And we can have a look at what's happening on the ground there. So they're a good source of intelligence for us. We do have regular meetings on a more formal basis with the districts as well, and we will feed that back in to see if there's any way we can formalise that sort of informal arrangement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, could I just come back? Yeah, I think that to me that seems the obvious thing to do. So if a food premises gets no stars or 1 star, I would like to see that is automatically reported to the county council trading standards, because if they're failing so badly on food safety, there's no way they're going to be doing everything with allergens, which we know are so important for people's health. So I think the more effort that can be put into that can only be for the good of the people of Lincolnshire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a similar question on inspections. Obviously, at the moment, with the bird flu situation hitting you badly, can you just give us a bit of an indication on your normal animal inspections? Are we talking a day or 2 days to complete an inspection? Thank you.
That will very much depend on the size of the premise and how many animals they're keeping, what range of animals they're keeping, and the problems that we find. It's probably, I wouldn't say we ever go more than a day for an inspection. It's usually a few hours on site and then some follow-up work. If we do need to go back because improvements required, then obviously we'll issue that guidance and we'll return to the premise to follow that up. But it's usually done within a day.
Right, thank you for that. Can I come back on a further question, please? On page 33, it mentions about the sale of vapes to children. Excuse my ignorance, but what is the age limit? And how do we go about getting that across, either by school, social media, or whatever, to warn children off that vapes are almost as bad as the actual cigarettes? Thank you.
Right, so the legal age is 18 for sale of vapes to an adult. There has been a significant increase in the use of disposable vapes amongst children, and we've seen that in reports to ourselves. We have provided advice to businesses. We've written to over 100 and sent guidance out about vape compliance in general, making sure that they're not oversized, overstrength. But also around underage sales as well. We've carried out a number of operations, but we are finding around a third of the premises that we've inspected, sales have occurred. So we do follow that up with advice, and we do follow it up with revisits later on in the year. And we will take formal action, including prosecution, if people repeat offend. So we are working on it. We are aware of it. We have a tobacco control officer who is funded through public health funding, who's located with trading standards. He's been working predominantly around tobacco and alcohol with children that are excluded. But due to the scale of the vape problem, he's developed a talk that he's been delivering in schools, and it's been delivered to over 4,000 pupils. And we're still getting requests for that to be repeated. So it is on the radar. It is something that we're working to address. And we will carry on with those test purchasing operations and getting the advice out there.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question for you, Mark, but it's just been asked by Councillor Clark. But on that unsafe products removed from the market, on those vapes, we've got in there as a guide, compliant vapes should not exceed 600 puffs. Trading standards have seized those advertisers contain up to 10,000 vapes. Is that a mistake, or is that a typo, or is that me not reading it right? It goes from 600 puffs to 10,000 vapes.
That's a typo. It should be
typo,
10,000
so it should be puffs.
Yes.
Okay, right, let's clear that one up. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask, because I was reading on a French newspaper that there is the mad cow disease is back in Brazil. And can you assure us, because we import a lot of beef from Brazil, can you assure us that there is no contamination in our meat and the meat which is sold in our markets and supermarkets? Thank you.
I think, again, that meat is imported. It's subject to checks, border checks, and will have been certificated by an environmental health officer, I believe.
Okay, thank you. No further questions on that section? No. We've got libraries and heritage on the same agenda part, so we will.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be able to report that performance is very strong across culture still. We achieved a 99.4% success rate in our visitors rating their experience as either good or very good. Library website use continues to be significantly above target, which is partially due to the increase in digital access that we saw over COVID that hasn't gone back to pre-COVID levels. So that remains very strong. And the community use of libraries, which took a little longer to recover post-COVID, is also significantly above target. So that remains a really key part of how we engage with our communities across the county. We've talked quite a bit over the last year or so about the change in how our communities are engaging with libraries and how visits remain down on pre-COVID levels, but the amount of actual issues that people have been taking out has continued to climb. And actually this peaked at the end of Q3 in the situation that whilst our actual visits to libraries are down about a quarter, that pattern of people coming less but taking out more books has continued, and in actual fact issues in December were higher than they were pre-COVID. So that's physical issues, so that doesn't include the fact that our digital issues are also significantly up from pre-COVID as well. So we're very positive about that. The only real downside that we're experiencing at the moment is the interactions across heritage. The largest aspect of that is actual web visits, and the largest aspect of web visits is what we used to call, and still to an extent do, the links to the past website, which is where people can log on and they can get hold of parish records, they can do family history research, they can look at images from our huge archives showing the county's history. We're in the process and have been for a couple of years now of updating that website. Its old kind of hosting platform was out of date. We continue to increase that. We're still in a situation at the moment where the functionality of the old website hasn't been replicated by the new website, but we'll continue to work to get that back up to the kind of quality that it was before, and ideally to move it into a better website than we saw before, even though the change was driven more by technical need than actual engagement. Any questions I'm happy to take.
Councillor Lee.
Hi, it's not a question, it's a comment just to compliment you on the report and the library usage. I'm really pleased with the library that we have on the Ermine. It works well and it's a real community asset. I think my only comment, and it's not, I don't try to be negative, but I would like it noted for the record. I think it would be very helpful if they were open a lot more hours, because it's just so well used. If it was open more, people would benefit more. So just for the record, I would be much happier if we were open a lot more up at the Ermine. But you're doing really well at what you do and well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All of the hubs do operate in different ways. So the amount of hours that they open is entirely up to them, and it does vary quite significantly. All that we ask as the minimum is that they open for 6 hours as a library. Obviously, some of the hubs have a much, much broader kind of appeal and service that they offer. So it often comes down to that kind of, not just the appetite, because the appetite is clearly there up at the Ermine, but it's that kind of the opportunity and the availability of volunteers to be able to extend the hours.
Yeah, come back.
Yeah, just to come back on that, it isn't about the appetite, it's absolutely about the resourcing, because, you know, that there aren't enough people there, and I just think sometimes that relying on volunteers for everything, I understand all the rationale, I've been through all this with Councillor Corey, why that's the case, but from my point of view, the community aren't getting access to something that they need as often and for as long as they need, simply because there is not the resourcing put into it that means that it can open for that number of hours. It's not a choice, it's the way things are. Thank you.
Thank you, understood.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Brockway, followed by Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. I noticed that online engagement is increasing when it comes to libraries. So what do people actually do when they're engaging with us online? What do you mean by online engagement? Thank you.
Oh gosh, how long do we have? So our online services are incredibly broad. Obviously, e-books are a huge part of what we do now, but there are music streaming services online. There's access that the County Council pays for through its contracts that give people access to various other services for free. Some of those are kind of library adjacent, so kind of biblioteclia, dictionaries, etc. Some of them include links to things like ancestry research. For everyone, I think there's 10 that I haven't thought of. I would encourage everyone to go and have a look. It's a fantastic resource and growing all of the time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'd like to comment about glad to see so many visitors to the libraries and the mobile library. And I was just wondering, what activities did the libraries manage to put together, do you know, for National Book Day? Thank you.
It's a huge day in our libraries. It's a huge day across our schools as well. So I think certainly all the core libraries were able to have kind of activities going on. It's one of those days where people do seem to like to dress up as their kind of favourite characters from books as well. I think the activity was a little bit more varied across the hubs, but most of them it was kind of more about driving visits and kind of just encouraging that and having that kind of, you know, come along, it's World Book Day, come and see what we've got, find out something new, and do it in a fun way.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I just want to comment in my area how proactive the libraries are being. I mean, the Horncastle Library is really offering a variety of services. We had Barclays Bank that closed in the town, and I know that Barclays are there on a number of occasions each week offering some of those services to the public, which is great. And also how proactive they are with the community. We have the Horncastle Christmas Market, which is very successful. It happens on a Sunday, but this last December they opened up the library on the Sunday, offering various activities for the younger people They had the youth market outside the library in the library precinct, and they just could not have been more proactive and community-minded. So it's congratulations to the service and the fact that the way in which they are being so proactive and offering these extra services to the community.
Thank you, and actually my thanks back to you as well for reaching out to us to see how we could work with the market. It was incredibly successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I won't hog this. I just wanted to come back, though. I do wonder sometimes if people realise just how much is available. We've got citizens' advice, we've got the policing surgeries, we have all sorts from the library. It's not, books are really important, but it's not just books. There's at least half a dozen extra things, as well as the training people that operate from the Ermine. So they offer a really valuable service, and that's why we need to be open more.
Okay, thank you. We had a flurry of questions there on libraries. Nothing there from Heritage. Anything? I think we covered the Heritage, didn't you, Will?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice time of year to talk about the fact that we are just launching our event programme for the year, particularly at Lincoln Castle. I mentioned earlier that we have the weekend celebration for the King's coronation. We've got the return of the joust since COVID. It's the first time we put that kind of large event on, and we've got the return of a lot of our family favourites. We've got a Lincolnshire Food and Drink Festival again this year. We have, of course, the Steampunk Festival, which is a perennial favourite, and the incredibly popular Dog Friendly Days, which are some of our busiest days. And we're actually growing that this year. And in the first week in July, as I recall, we're actually having kind of a bit of a dog activity day. So those of you that followed the Crufts footage and are familiar with Flyball, where the dogs kind of run backwards and forwards over hurdles and collecting balls, that will be happening in Lincoln Castle grounds this summer as well. And who knows, there may be even a return of a mythical creature back to the grounds after the success of Lucy the Dragon last year.
Yeah, good opportunity to get a few plugs in there, Will, so well done, yeah. Any comments on Heritage? No. Okay, well, I think we've got through agenda item 5 in a bit of a roundabout way, but I think we got there in the end. I don't think I've missed anyone out. No. So thank you for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of the item, and thank you to all the presenters. I'm going to move that we receive the report and request that our comments from today's discussion are taken under consideration by the relevant lead officers and executive portfolio holders as recorded. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you. Looking around, that's all agreed. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 6, which is the Road Safety Partnership Annual Report. This scrutiny report is on pages 39 to 78 of the agenda pack. The report seeks to provide committee members with an update on fatal and killed and serious injury casualty figures for Lincolnshire. Further, the report provides data on trends, comparisons and areas of priority. Our actions for today is that the committee is invited to consider and comment on the detailed report and highlight any recommendations or further actions required, and also seek assurance on the work being undertaken by the Road Safety Partnership to reduce the number of people killed and injured on county roads. Steve Batchelor, Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager, is here to present the report. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to compete with Will's mythical creatures and dogs and obstacle courses in the castle. That doesn't seem fair. Yeah, it can't try. Thank you. I'll try and give some of the key points from this year's annual report. We always start with a few traditional facts about the road network within Lincolnshire, simply because it gives us some indicators as to some of the challenges that we face, with it being one of the largest counties. Such an extensive road network of nearly 9,000 kilometres. The economy traditionally, as we all know, within the county is based around agriculture and manufacturing and tourism, particularly along the east coast. And the significance of that is that the types of vehicles that it brings and has mixing on our single carriageway, primarily 60 mile an hour national speed limit roads. Clearly there's seasonal traffic who might be unfamiliar with our roads as well, alongside two-wheel motor vehicles, Cadwell Park being very popular. Further, a high number of people migrate to Lincolnshire at or above retirement age, again, often over to the east coast. The proportion of the population over 65 years old is 22.9% across the whole of the county, but that rises to 30.4% in East Lindsey, and that compares to 17.8% as a national average. So in terms of what we've seen in 2022, in terms of the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads, the majority of those collisions and those casualties occurred on the rural road network as opposed to the urban areas. Casualties remain more likely to be male than female. They are distributed throughout the whole of the county, but the highest percentage of collisions occurred in East Lindsey with 27, just about 27%, South Kesteven being slightly behind that. The highest risk groups as we see them remain motorcycle riders, young drivers aged between 17 to 24, and mature road users. And I'll just highlight, because we've had conversations before, in the context of road safety, mature drivers are 60 and above, but I recognise that that it's very different, you know, as you move through 60 to 70, 70 to 80, if you're involved in a collision and the impacts on the body. We simply use 60 plus as that's a national figure and how they compare, so that we can look at how we rank compared to others. We saw the recent, over COVID, the rise in pedestrian, pedal cycle and child KSIs recede in 2022 quite substantially. I'm really pleased to report that. There was a 64.4% reduction in children of 0 to 15-year-old being killed and seriously injured, a 55% reduction in pedal cycle killed or seriously injured collisions, and a 33% reduction in pedestrian KSIs. So of course, throughout COVID, when there was various restrictions on the roads, some of those activities were what people were primarily doing, and so the risk clearly increased and the numbers increased. So I'm really pleased to see that that's come back down again and that has receded. Overall, there was 439 people killed and seriously injured in 2022, which is the lowest figure since 2016. So it was just over 3% reduction on the year before. So whilst it's only sort of marginal decreases, we have gone from 566 in 2017 down to 439 last year. So that is overall very positive. The only thing I would note also in terms of priority user groups is we did see a slight increase in car and taxi drivers, low-powered motorcycles, so not the bigger bikes we might often talk about. And again, I mentioned mature drivers still being high risk and seeing a slight increase there. And again, very likely to be as a result of the way in which traffic flow and traffic use changed post-COVID. A few facts about the fatalities themselves. Now, as you know, we focus on fatal and serious injury because the difference between somebody living and surviving in a collision can depend on a wide number of factors. So we want to understand the biggest levels of risk. But 69% of fatalities in 2022 were male. That's lower than it usually is. It's usually around 80 to 90%. 33% were in the 25 to 59 range, again quite a reduction, usually about 63. And as I've said last year, it's very difficult for us to make direct comparisons to some of the previous years because of all the changes that happened throughout 2020 and 2021. But I think most of what we're seeing is a sense of getting back to the way it was before. 65% of those fatal and serious collisions occurred in fine weather without high winds. Usually it's a bit higher, around 90-odd%. And 96% of fatal accidents happened on the A and B class roads. And again, we would usually expect that to be a bit more spread out across C and unclassified as well. But that's just some of the information that we're seeing. And the highest contributory factors defined through the Stats 19 reporting was careless, reckless, and in a hurry, which again is exactly the same as it was in 2021. Just with regard to some of the activity that we've been doing in the last year to try and improve road safety throughout the county, we assessed over 1,000 sites and links of routes to identify 50 sites that needed further investigation. They are then further filtered down into engineering improvements, generally speaking around signing and lining and minor works. For example, vehicle activated signing at the bend at Foldingworth and on the A46, and reduced speed limits and interactive signs at Moulton and Weston on the A151. We've almost completed the Safer Roads Fund from the Department for Transport. That saw us make improvements to the A18, A631, A1084 and the A18 in conjunction with North East Lincolnshire. We've just got some parts of the A631 to be complete. Pretty much now, I think, just getting the average speed camera system installed. So a contract's been issued for that, but we've had issues with getting power sources to where we want the columns. So it's just taken a little bit longer than we would like, but it will be certainly done this year. With regards to the enforcement that we're undertaking, continuing to work very closely with our neighbourhood policing, roads policing and special constables teams throughout the county to try and highlight the locations where we see the highest risk in terms of speeds and collisions. At this point in time, we now have 8 average speed camera systems, 38 static systems and over 100 mobile camera locations. In 2023, we will be making further upgrades to the cameras. Some of the ones that haven't yet been made digital from when they were wet film cameras will be happening this year. We're also changing the A16 Burwell camera, and the A16 at Sutterton will also see a new average speed camera system at some point this year as well. Community Speed Watch continues to grow. We're now up to 281 members, be that parish or within a city or town. There's also 91 trained groups now who can undertake the monitoring of vehicle speeds, which then result in letters being sent out to drivers from Lincolnshire Police. So there's 508 documented locations at which that activity can now be undertaken, and more than 30,000 letters have now been sent out to motorists since we started doing Community Speed Watch in 2018. Operation SNAP, which is the scheme that allows members of the public to submit dashcam footage of alleged road traffic offences, again continues to grow, and we've tried to do this in a not conservative way, but certainly take our time and ensure that we've got the resource in-house so that people are getting the service that they would expect. But we've gone up from approximately 30 submissions when we first started in February 2021 to on average up to about 150 submissions every month now from members of the public, so again really positive. Of the 1,722 submissions that we received last year, 566 of those were processed by Lincolnshire Police as potential offences, and in addition 514 warning letters were sent to drivers. I really like the warning letters element of this system because under normal circumstances, if a submission didn't meet the evidential threshold or wasn't quite an offence, then generally nothing would have happened. There'd be no further action taken. There are some circumstances where you say, okay, the video might not show everything that we need to prove this offence in court, but it's still enough that we think the driver needs some sort of warning, and so we were able to send those letters out to motorists as well. So there was another 514 of those. Lots of different processed offences through Operation SNAP that have been seen by members of the public, but due care and attention, dangerous driving, reasonable consideration for others, failure to comply with solid white lines and mobile phone use are just some of them. And we've just released, you can find it on the Lincolnshire Police website, the latest edition of Dodgy Drivers, which are, I think, 10 examples of some of the submissions that we've had in the last 6 months, which is always quite interesting. Finally, under education, training and publicity, which is the third area in which we undertake road safety provision in this county, we delivered National Driver Offender Retraining Scheme courses as an alternative to prosecution to more than 25,000 people in 2022. The training initiative Biker Down has now been introduced into Lincolnshire. So working in collaboration with Lives, Links and Knots Air Ambulance, our Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue colleagues have been taking the lead on this initiative, which will impact on the life-saving skills that bikers can have when they are the first on scene, and so post-crash care being a really important element of the work that's being done. I think the first courses were delivered in 2022, and we'll be doing more going into the future. Alongside that, again, our fire and rescue safety advocate based at the partnership undertook a project to educate and reiterate the need for correct child seat fitting in vehicles throughout the year. The events package was rolled out to allow fire stations and road safety advocate to organise and carry out child seat safety events throughout the county. So I think a really good way of showing how partnership working can occur and ensuring that the types of activity we think is important is sent out through as many avenues as possible. Just a quick note about our Mileage for Life course, which is about providing training and guidance to mature drivers. We had to stop that throughout COVID because of the high-risk nature of it, but we will be reintroducing that again in 2022 after we've re-evaluated the scheme and try and make sure that we've got it as up-to-date as we possibly could. As you know, we also deliver a lot of road safety education into schools in both primary and secondary schools. So at primary, we're primarily focused on pedestrian safety, but also some in-car safety, environmental trails and getting younger road users used to what's going on around them. We also do cycle helmets, and the Junior Road Safety Officer scheme is something that we're pushing much more into schools and trying to get them active and participating in road safety themselves. At secondary school, it moves, the level of risk changes, and it moves into adapting to survive, thinking about being a young passenger, maybe with friends as opposed to with parents, and that level of independence that you have when using the roads and going about. So trying to get people safe in the way in which they operate, and also preparing to drive as they get up to sixth form. That's all the things I'm going to say about the report. I will just pick up on one of the questions that Councillor Danny mentioned with regards to foreign drivers and migrant drivers. I know it's something that he's raised here before. After the last overview and scrutiny committee meeting, I did go and speak to my police colleagues, because we had previously done quite a comprehensive report on the types of offences that were being committed and whether or not that was in a different proportion for people who were foreign drivers or driving foreign vehicles. I was told that the best thing we could do was just to wait for the most up-to-date census data, which wasn't available. It had been delayed last year. But as soon as that is done, we'll then start using that information and comparing it with the offence data by Lincolnshire Police. We'll be able to share much more information about the levels at which those types of potential offences are occurring, and then we'll be much better placed to try and look at how we target and stop it from happening in the future. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key, followed by Councillor Mrs Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a comment and then a question, please. We are the 5th longest highways network, as you say in your report, and I would just like to say it's a big issue, speeding and road safety. In my division of Heckington, we're a rural area, and I would like to pay tribute to the Road Safety Partnership, who've really helped my parish councils who've been installing the speed devices. We've had a real push on it, and we're getting a bit of a row of them through the villages, and I know they're very grateful. I won't name the member of staff who's come out, but you'll know who it will be at Heckington. He's been amazing, so I'd like to pay tribute to him in helping the villages get these cameras and put them in the right place, these indicator devices, because they are making a real difference. In one particular village, I know the 80% now of vehicles are actually at or below the speed limit, which is a real improvement to what we had before. The other thing that I've been pushing is the community speed watch. There was one parish council meeting which there was a big contingent of the public there, and you know there's trouble when that happens, and that was about speeding cars. And I was talking to them about this, and they asked for volunteers to set one up, and nobody volunteered because they were apprehensive about doing so, and about the fact that they would be local people mainly who they'll be monitoring. So how can we get through to people in Lincolnshire about Community Speed Watch and reassure them about this fear they have of shopping their neighbour, basically, to put it bluntly, that's putting people off perhaps joining these groups, because they really do make a big difference. This particular village has had a speed indicator device fitted now because that was seen as an alternative. But it would be nice to actually reassure people more about the Community Speed Watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will certainly pass on the thanks and the gratitude that you've expressed there. I think it's really important for us to try and work with yourselves as councillors to understand the issues that you're facing in the community, and then look at what we can realistically do to assist. Now, as you know, because you're on the front line, we can't always match the demand that residents will express, but there's often some things that we can do that maybe we hadn't considered before, and some of the the suggestions that you've just given there, Councillor, really are positive and do make a difference. With regard to Community Speed Watch, you've identified a big issue. It is a challenge. I think where there is a significant problem with speeding, particularly where it's backed up with collisions having occurred, then I think the onus needs to be on the authorities to undertake action, be that enforcement, education, or whatever it may be. But there are times when it's community concern that's the biggest thing. So it's not necessarily that that's resulting in lots of collisions happening, or even that, you know, there's a significant proportion of people speeding. But I think communities need to feel empowered and feel like they can make a difference to their safety. And so being active through community speed watch, be that passive interactive signs, or by doing the speed monitoring, can be a huge way to help. The idea that those very people that they're helping to protect in the community, you know, might be dissatisfied or unhappy with the work they're doing is just wrong. I know that I would be very happy to attend, and as will my colleagues, to talk at a parish council meeting, for example, to explain what's being done and the positive elements of it. Of course, as we know, it doesn't lead to enforcement action, it leads to a warning letter from the police. So ultimately, the dissatisfaction that some of their neighbours might feel isn't going to be too long lasting, but what it should do is demonstrate that people do care, that they do think it's a problem, and that they want something to change. And so, you know, working together as a community can have that impact. Ultimately, there does come a point, though, where it may not be right for some people. You know, there is potential for verbal conflict on occasions. It may be that when you go to the co-op or to the pub, if you've been doing that, that somebody doesn't like it. And there is only going to be so much that we can do, but we're happy to do whatever we can to try and assist.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Clark.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Steve, for that report. And you've answered lots of my questions, actually, so that's brilliant. But there's a couple of things that I really want to just touch base with you over. I'm in the process of setting up a community speed watch, and it's quite exciting. And the local police officer has offered to help with that, for that very reason, actually, that you've just been talking about, because people worry about doing it. And that's going to be around a school. Now, I would like to ask you, there's a lot of dropping off on double yellow lines outside a particular school in my division. It's actually in Carlton, on the Carlton estate, and it's becoming a real issue and problem for the lady who is the school crossing lady, for the buses, because they're parking, they're just dropping off. And although I know in law I think it's okay for people to do that, double yellow lines means you don't do that. And I think there needs to be some clarity around that, especially if your group can look at that. So for me, that's becoming a real problem. And also around schools, I'm having to negotiate if that's a 20-mile-an-hour zone. It should be a 20-mile-an-hour zone. People should be slowing down where they know pedestrians and children are coming out, particularly at peak times. And I don't think that's negotiable any longer. It needs to be highlighted so that drivers, everybody understands this area needs to be safe. So that's something else that I'd want to pick up on. And also, can I ask you about the training for the 60-plus drivers? What exactly does that involve? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So with regard to parking outside schools, that is the responsibility of highways as opposed to us at the Road Safety Partnership. But we do work closely with them, particularly around schools, with the school crossing patrols, as you've highlighted. It can be very difficult for them to do their job safely if parking, you know, is being done in an inconsiderate way. We can also work on occasion with our police colleagues, certainly the neighboured policing teams, if there's a clear obstruction as well. Again, it's a bit like the issue we were just talking about with community speed watch, that the very people who you would expect to want to keep children the safest, the parents, guardians who are dropping them off, would be prepared to contribute to making it less safe, and I find that very strange. But one of the things that we can do is work as closely as we can with the schools themselves. I think often the messages that we put out through the newsletters or through bespoke specific information to parents can be quite important. And when that doesn't happen and we identify a problem, then there does need to be some figure of authority in attendance to either undertake some enforcement or at least give some guidance to people as to the way in which their behaviour is incorrect. So there are things that we can do, and I can take away the Carlton area that you've highlighted and speak to my road safety officers and get them to come to you if we haven't done so already. With regards to 20 mile an hours, we're currently reviewing all of the traffic management policies within Lincolnshire County Council. One big element of that, of course, is the 20 mile an hour speed limits, be that ones that are already in place but might be advisory, like school safety zones, whether they need to be backed up with traffic regulation orders, but also considering how we might want to implement 20 mile an hour speed limits or zones going forward as well, particularly outside the areas where there's the highest risk, schools being a prime example. So I think over the next year or so, as that work is done, I think everybody will start to see what the plan is going forward with 20 mile an hour speed limits. Was there a third one? Did I miss one? Or was that? Apologies.
Yes, it was the 60 plus. 60 plus, yeah.
Apologies, thank you, Councillor. So what we've done previously is there was two elements. One was a theory element, so in a classroom, and then another was in-car guidance and assessment. So the theory part, I think, was really beneficial because it allowed people to come together who might be having the same concerns, the same issues. You know, you could be a 70-year-old driver and have passed your test and had absolutely no interaction whatsoever with anyone in authority with regards to your driving life. And of course, you know, the challenges change. The physicality of driving at different ages, your ability to observe through sight, you know, and declining eyesight, or the ability to turn and see at some of the junctions that we have on the fast-moving roads. All of those things can play a part. So previously, I think it was 3 hours in a classroom where we did it centrally for a while, but then we started going out into communities and delivering around the county, and I think we'll probably take that approach again this time. Very supportive environment. There's no risk associated with the driver. No one's going to say you can't have a licence or shouldn't be there, which has often been communicated to us as a risk. The second part, the in-car, I think that can be really useful, particularly if people have concerns about their driving. So, you know, somebody who might be towards the end of their driving career, maybe their family members have indicated that, you know, they're a little bit worried as well. Again, it's about being able to provide a supportive environment where a trained advanced driving instructor can spend some time with them, talk through the issues, and then point them in the right direction if they need to get some guidance, because, you know, it might be time to consider not driving, or to extend because they're perfectly safe. So they're the two elements, both in-car and theory. We've been able to deliver the free at various points, and we'll be looking to try and do that again. But again, I'll be able to update once we've finished the review.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of councillors wishing to speak, but next one on the list is Councillor Brockway, then followed by Councillor Gray.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this report. I'm particularly interested in the education aspects on page 47. I'm very pleased about your Biker Down initiative. I've long held a full bike licence, and when I started riding, which I don't do anymore, but when I started riding, I was always shocked by the way bikers would always stop to help. They never, ever went past if you were in trouble. So to train those people is really, really good sense. So, and I just wonder if there are any other groups who have a particular identity in that way that we could utilise towards safety. So that's just a comment. My other comment with a question was to do with the older drivers. There's been some fuss in the press recently that older drivers consider that they're being treated in a discriminatory fashion with attempts to take them off the road. In some cases, probably they have to be taken off the road. We're all going to get there eventually if we live long enough. But could you give me some idea of the difference in figures between accidents or deaths on the road caused by older drivers as opposed to the 17 to 24 age group? Or if you haven't got those figures to hand, am I able to get them at some point, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As I highlighted, the Biker Down initiative has been led by Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, so we're really pleased that they've been able to get that off the ground and that we've been able to support them in terms of providing a venue and helping with the design of the materials as well, etc. That's only one of the courses in which our Fire and Rescue advocate has been assisting. Do a lot of work around Too Fast Too Soon aimed at 17 to 20-year-olds as well, so that's really positive. We've also got our Smart Rider scheme for bikers, which is about one-on-one guidance and training, and we've also reintroduced Bike Save over the last 2 years, the national police course, and all of our courses have been fully booked that we've delivered so far. So a lot of work being done in that area. I think the other obvious group to me might be around pedal cyclists and horse riders, who both are very passionate about the activity they're undertaking. And there is quite a community feel around those activities as well. So I think that maybe they would be two of the areas that, you know, we might look to do something in the future. Secondly, in terms of the older drivers, again, I mentioned at the very beginning of the report the number of people, or the percentage of people in the 60-plus category, and that it's a very popular place to retire. And because of the length of the size of the county, the length of the road network, and the public transport provision, people are going to need to be able to drive longer than they might need to in other areas. I guess if you live in the middle of London, it's not quite as important as it is if you live in the middle of rural Lincolnshire. So it's really about us being supportive and helping people to be able to drive as safely as they possibly can. But mature drivers aren't dangerous drivers. No, they're less likely to be involved in the collision. The problem is if they are involved in the collision, the physical nature of their body at that point in their life means they are more likely to be fatally or seriously injured than it is for other age groups. So it's more about protection as much as anything else. So again, it's not about taking licenses away. It's about trying to help, try and be supportive. A lot of the data around 17 to 24 and mature drivers is in the supplementary data report. But if that hasn't got the information you need, please let me know, and I will try and do a specific comparison for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray, followed by Councillor Dunning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to comment on collisions. The highest percentage is in East Lindsey. I have a big rural patch in East Lindsey with my county patch and my district patch. I cover over 50 parishes and the town of Horncastle. So drivers coming to the coast, to Cadwell, to the Lincolnshire Wolds, they'll come through my area. So what more can be done to reduce the collisions in East Lindsey? Because something has to happen, so what more can be done?
Thank you, Councillor. So two things we'll be looking at this year. The first is highlighting the area that you've just outlined, and we're going to do an in-depth study into it so that we've got the most up-to-date and relevant information and data available to us, so we can understand the very nature of the problems as opposed to maybe some of the assumptions. They're likely to be correct, and you've highlighted some there in terms of people not being familiar with the roads because they're either through tourism or motorcycles, etc. But we'll do that in-depth investigative piece this year. That will hopefully guide us much more in the right direction. The second thing we'll be looking to do over the coming year is to start looking at the different levels of governance within this county and how we can work better with those who really understand and know what's going on in their communities. So I'm talking about parish councils, district councils, borough councils, city councils. So there's no formal mechanism at this point in time for us to be working closely on some of these issues. So that is one thing that we're going to be spending a lot of time on and trying to think about how we can undertake that work better. More specifically, the issues, as you highlighted, around motorcycles, around tourism, I think it's about doing the things that we're currently doing, just doing more of it and doing it better in a more targeted way. We need to make sure that our enforcement is highly targeted at the locations of highest risk. We need to make sure there's more resource available to do that enforcement as well. We need to make sure that our education is tackling the problems that are actually causing those collisions on there. Now, that's more difficult when you're looking at people who are coming on for tourism, because how can you ensure that you're getting your education to the right people before they get here? So then it's about how can you do localised education that people see as they're on the road as well. So I think there are things that we can do, but primarily everything that I've outlined in the report is targeted at the specific nature of the problems in Lincolnshire. So I think it's just about doing them as well as we possibly can and as much as we possibly can, as well as the education, investigative work I just highlighted to make sure that we targeted things effectively.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny, followed by Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just go to page 48, point 7.2, which is pedestrian safety. Oh, unfortunately, in Boston, we had a meeting last Friday about community safety, and the expression of people and people I talk to outside, they're not very happy because they feel that they have been in sort of intimidated by like cyclists, drivers. Talking about cyclists, I mean, I know that there is a fixed penalty for £50 if a cyclist cycle on pedestrian area, but it's not applicable. The police, they never stopped anybody. They can't pass them. It's like normal, so it becomes normal. So there is this kind of fear of walking like by the Haven Bank. It's no cycling area. There is cycling people all the time. So wherever you find a sign there is no cycling, there is people cycling. So nobody's implementing the law. Nobody's exercising the law in the right way. So these kind of behaviors, and we're talking about pedestrian safety, people, they fear for their lives. So therefore, they don't come to the town center. Therefore, they affect the businesses in town. So we need towns to thrive. I mean, Boston is cosmopolitan. If you stand in the town center on any day, it's like a Mannheim. Cycling, cars, people sometimes playing football in the town center, kicking things. So it worries me because we are not doing enough to bring the trust and the confidence to our residents. So they can, as I say, come to the town centers, enjoy themselves, go for a meal, go for a coffee, go and buy things, do their shoppings on a daily basis. So that's one of the things which is, I've been talking to Superintendent Coates from Lincolnshire, and I think Inspector Clarkson, who is now in Boston, and we talked about it before as well, so I mentioned it to them again. And I would like to see some action. That's one thing. Second thing of my speech is regarding this signs on the road. On last Sunday, just this past Sunday, I went to Freedville to visit a friend of mine, and then I drove from there to Horncastle, and I went to Lincoln. And unfortunately, you know, some turns, they're very sharp, but the signs are turned, they are ripped, you cannot see them. Now, that's one thing. The second thing for the signs, you don't have a precaution sign before that, at least should be 500 probably meters, or probably almost a mile to tell you there is a zigzag road. There is nothing, so you just come in a blind turn and you have to brake and turn, even if you go with 40 miles an hour. And that's, again, the signs, I mentioned it to Richard Davis from the highways, because, you know, when you drive around Lincolnshire, and especially when there is icy roads, there is no precautions that there is icy road. We should know that certain places are dangerous and they are more probably they can contribute to an accident, which can be fatal. It could be just probably an accident, but however, it will block the roads. And I think we should again look out at our signs around Lincolnshire, because really it will make a difference. At the moment, sometimes I have a feeling that I'm just driving and you go in the country lanes and there is nothing. And I was looking at the BBC Lincolnshire yesterday, and unfortunately the 17-year-old boy has passed away after his fatal accident. So when you look at the road, there is no signs to tell you there is a ditch on this side or on this side. So if you come at night, and probably anybody of us will experience that, you don't know where you're going, you know, just the road sometimes is bumpy, it's not very even, so you have to be very, very, very careful. So I think we should do some things about these signs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Whilst I don't have responsibility for delivering the two types of thing you've just highlighted, we do work very closely with the people that do, and of course, ultimately it affects the work that we're doing in overall in road safety. I think what you highlighted with Boston and the way in which the town centre is being used and the way in which certain types of road users are using it, you know, there has to be a part of this which is personal and community responsibility. So whilst it's really important that we do enforce these issues, I think it's also equally important that people take responsibility for the way in which they treat others and the way in which they put other people in danger. The highway code was changed last year to have the new hierarchy in there, which means that every level of road user has a responsibility, explicit responsibility for those that are more vulnerable than themselves. So I think that's probably around education and getting people to understand why it's so important and understand the consequences. But then going back to the community speed watch scheme, there comes a time, as you've highlighted, where it's causing a danger to others and it needs to be enforced. And so I'm happy to talk to Pat Coates and the inspector as well, just to reiterate the message that you've highlighted. Look, you know, cyclists will tell us day in, day out about how they are being put in danger by motor vehicle users, which they are. It's equally as important that pedestrians have a voice and are able to demonstrate when cyclists are putting them at danger as well. So again, it comes back to that sort of personal and community responsibility. Again, we don't have responsibility for the signs, but I do support the message that you've highlighted there, and that there needs to be enough information and safety signs to ensure that people can understand how the road is and what impact it might have on their driving. There's a balance to be had between proliferation of signs and having too much there, and they need to be legal signs that are in the TSRGD as well. But that aside, if people don't know that it's potentially icy, or they're not getting fair warning of the severe turns that are coming up, then of course they're not going to be able to modify their behaviour as well as we need them to remain safe. So again, I'm happy to work with my colleagues within highways, and I will specifically highlight the route that you've just mentioned as well there, and get them to do a drive through and see if there are any areas or issues specifically that we can start to tackle.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mr Clark, followed by Councillor Stokes.
Thank you, Chairman. A very comprehensive report with lots of stats and information, which obviously highlights or helps with your programme as to where you're going to go. I must admit I hadn't heard of your Biker Down programme. Sounds very useful indeed and very proactive. I wonder whether you've ever used police motorcyclists to promote that amongst fellow motorbike enthusiasts. And another question seems to be about getting the information across to the public. Obviously, with all the stats that you've got there, that would be too much to give it in one hit. I wonder whether you'd ever considered doing bite-size publications, either in the county news, using the Echo, maybe even trying to get BBC Radio Links involved, or Look North, who always seem to be looking for interesting stories. And if we can use your stats to reduce by 1 or 2 the casualties, because I was absolutely staggered to read that over £2 million is estimated to cost if there was a fatality on the road. That's a phenomenal amount of money, besides the grief that it comes to the relevant family. So any help on getting the stats information out to reduce would be brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor. We didn't publicise Biker Down too much because it was being launched last year, so it was the first ones. We wanted to ensure that the programme itself was running right, that we got the right material, that we had learned all the slides, etc. So it was kind of the trial. That was the first launch, but we will be doing much more publicity around that going forwards, particularly within the Fire and Rescue Service. But to the wider point about how we promote biking activity, we do work very closely with Lincolnshire Police motorcyclists. We actively have them involved in the bike safe courses that we also provide. We attend pretty much every bike night that there is throughout the county across the year, including Willingham Woods and Boston. What we try and do there is have a more low-key approach, where it's about providing support, providing guidance, providing training if people want it. So not on an authoritative, trying to stop people from enjoying biking safely. But that is a challenge for us, getting that balance. There are some motorcycle riders who are undertaking antisocial behaviour, and we had lots of complaints up around Willingham Wood. So it's vital that we're able to target that and tackle that effectively to keep the community safe. But equally, it's about helping and providing training and information to bikers. The last thing I think of well around biking and communications is clearly it's got to be about other road users as well. There's quite a lot of examples where motorcycle riders are at absolutely no fault whatsoever when these collisions are occurring, and it's because people haven't seen them or haven't reacted in the way in which they should, or should have seen them and didn't. And so again, it's about helping to educate the wider public as well. We will be having a new communications officer at the Road Safety Partnership this year. We had one previously, and then we sort of changed the roles around a little bit, so they were doing more work around events. But we've identified that there's a lot of information that needs to get out, both internally. I would imagine that if we didn't do this report every year, there'd be councillors here who maybe wouldn't know some of the stuff that we do, and that's not right. You need to be made aware of the types of resources and activity that's available to you. So we'll be doing a lot more communications work over the next year once we've got that person in post, including working with the press and the media, and using a lot of the information contained in the reports to educate motorists as well.
Thank you very much indeed for that.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Stokes next, followed by Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So my question relates to page 46 and the Operation Snap. I mean, it's quite an impressive statistic that 62% of submissions actually received either a letter or further processing for offences. I'm just wondering how we as councillors can help promote this operation, because I think it's going forward. I think more and more people are having dash cams in their vehicles, and I believe that is probably the way forward to support the police. I'm just wondering how we can help promote that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think it's been a real success so far. One of the things we try and do is help people to refine the way in which they're making submissions. You'll find sometimes people have a particular issue that they're very keen on. For example, if you're a pedal cyclist and you've experienced lots of close passes, then you feel very passionately about trying to highlight some of the activity that particularly bigger vehicle drivers are doing near you. But it has, we have to, because it hasn't been witnessed by an officer at the time, it really does have to meet a certain level of threshold. Everything about the offence needs to be in that video and quite clear, so that we can then process that through to completion. And again, it does provide a lot of opportunities for offender retraining courses as well, which again is about providing education, so that's positive. In terms of promotion, now that it's well established, we just say we want to get that balance between the amount of resource we have available for processing offences, because it can be quite timely, and also increasing knowledge and information so that people know about the scheme. So I think over this year we'll probably move out of the getting it up and running, knowing that all the systems are in place, and then start to increase that. And I think once we do that, I'll certainly be in touch with councillors and have a better idea of how we might promote that. I think one of the things you might want to promote to people when talking about it, though, is that very often your dash cam has audio. So when you witness some of these things that are happening in the cars and we watch them, there's some very interesting commentary, it's fair to say.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Lee next, followed by Councillor Brockway. So, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a really informative report. I'm going to keep that for reference. We've got problems in my patch, both on Broadway, and there are 2 places on the Ermine East that I can think of as hot spots. Would it be appropriate for me to email you on that address and see about how we take that forward? Because the Ermine East particularly, I keep getting email after email about stuff. I've spoken to, I suspect, the same officer as Councillor Key about a gun to monitor it, but I think that perhaps we need something a bit more than that, but I'll email you anyway. And just to go to Councillor Mrs Clark's comments about the school, we had exactly the same problem. I kid you not, all the things you've mentioned at Ermine Academy, and I can speak to you after this meeting if you like, tell you how we tackled it. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I do sympathise with the school one, because we've recently had yellow lines where I live in my community, and it's caused mayhem, and dare I say the disabled people are actually flouting the law as much as they possibly can, because of course disabled can park on double yellow lines, but they're actually there because they know they can, yeah, and to the tantamount of other parents, sit there reading a book for an hour prior to picking the school children up and things like this. And parking services are aware, Steve, but there is a problem outside schools. Thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Yeah, thank you for letting me come back, actually. 1 or 2 things I forgot and thought about afterwards. When we were talking about cyclists, one of the things that concerns me about cyclist safety enormously is the difference between cyclists and bikers when it comes to protection. Often a cyclist would travel at the same speed as I would have travelled on a motorbike in 30 or under, but I was heavily protected with my helmet and my protective clothing, and cyclists have absolutely nothing. If they go on the road, their skin's going to come off the same as mine would. And it really worries me that cyclists are on these very, very busy roads, sometimes travelling very fast. Some of them go at quite considerable speed, and yet they have no protection at all, other than a small helmet. The other thing I wanted to raise was that I've been concerned about the number of electric scooters I've seen on roads, which I understand they're not supposed to be there, but they certainly are. There again, they've got no protective clothing and no legality, and presumably no insurance as well. And just one last comment about older drivers. I've been assisting a family recently where an older driver is allowed to drive but has a dementia diagnosis but still is allowed to drive. But what is worrying is that the family was not aware that they had to report that once the diagnosis was made. And one wonders if a direct reporting from the person who made the diagnosis needs to be invoked, because certainly it does seem that not everybody knows that once that diagnosis is made, they has to be reported to DVLC. And one last thing, really sorry, I remembered, the business about the difference between the accident rate between the older drivers and the younger ones. I found the fatalities in the report, but I couldn't find an overall. It's probably there. If you could just point me in, that'd be brilliant. Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman.
Thank you. Last point first. I think what I'll do is I'll just take that away as an action and do a direct comparison for you. Yep, no problem at all. Cyclists, yeah, it's a tricky subject for me because I seem to annoy anybody, or somebody, no matter which sort of direction I take on this. But there's a really clear balance. We do not accept that it's a natural occurrence that somebody should be killed or seriously injured just by the fact that they are trying to travel somewhere. And so if you are a vulnerable road user, you know, the risk is obviously going to be highest, and so that's where we need to do the most amount of work. I fully accept that there is an issue sometimes of victim blaming when it comes to cyclists, you know, sort of pointing out all the things that maybe they could have done differently or what they should do to protect themselves, and maybe not enough focus on the dangerous driving that has put them at risk in the first place. So I just want to be absolutely clear, that is one of the key areas in which we do focus, and that is trying to help keep pedal cyclists, horse riders and other vulnerable road users safe, and we promote that and support that absolutely. But I think what it is important for us to do as a road safety organisation is to highlight what we consider to be best practice and what we believe is going to help and assist people staying safe as well. And again, it comes back to the point I just mentioned about a degree of personal responsibility with this as well. So if you are, you know, more visible, or your clothing provide you with a degree of protection, then that is clearly going to potentially help keep you safer than if you, for example, are constantly wearing dark clothing, especially in low light and in the evenings, or you're not wearing a cycling helmet or any other protective clothing as well. So we're not saying and dictating how people should protect themselves, but we are saying that there are things out there that are going to help to keep you safe, and we will constantly put that message out as well. So personally, I think that you know, highly visible clothing and a cycle helmet is something that everybody should wear when they're undertaking this activity, but I do recognise and accept there's a degree of personal choice there as well. Electric scooters is an emerging problem, and it's one that I think is only going to get bigger, whilst there's this sort of grey area of legislation, and they seem to be becoming more prevalent on the streets and on the roads without the legal authority to do so. But the enforcement of that is with the police, and we do work with the police, and I know that it's an issue that they are starting to look at more and more and think about how we can tackle it going forwards, because there isn't a great deal that we're doing at this point in time, but we want to do it before it becomes an issue. In terms of the mature drivers as well, I mentioned the vast majority of our work is trying to keep people on the roads as safe as possible, but we also work with the NHS very closely, particularly within GP surgeries, on providing information to both the mature driver themselves and to family members around how they can make the decision proactively that it's maybe time for them to consider not driving because they might not feel safe enough, and it's given them the tools to make that decision and ensuring that the advice is available to them. So we work closely with the NHS on doing that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come back briefly. You can obviously tell how important this is to us councillors because of a number of questions you've had. I'm a funeral celebrant when I'm not doing this, and over the years I've done many funerals for people who've fallen victim on the roads. So I know the human cost involved. I've seen it. I've seen the devastation. And when you look at numbers and figures, you can sometimes, I think, very easily forget that behind each of these numbers is all this heartache. It ruins people's lives. It ruins the lives of families, and they never get over it. They never do. And I can remember when we had over 100 fatalities in a year, and that was dreadful. And we've got 48, but that's 48 families whose lives have been ruined. And that just shows, I think, how important your work is. If we can just save one life, it makes it 47. It's one family that doesn't have to go through all of that. I've seen it so many times. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's so sudden. People don't get the chance to say goodbye, and it breaks your heart when you have to deal with that. And so good on you, and long may you continue to do what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I certainly couldn't express the sentiment that you have any better. What I would probably only try and add is that You're absolutely right. I don't know any other area of public service where, in a county such as ours, we would accept nearly 500 people being killed or injured every year in any other activity. But I think universally, it's almost got to the stage where we just accept that this level of death and injury is going to happen just because you want to get from A to B. And I think there needs to be a transition into a new way of thinking, and saying that at every stage and in every step of the road safety system, that we just do not accept that. Now, you'll hear a lot about Vision Zero, particularly in Scandinavian countries, and becoming more and more prevalent in the UK as well. And that's not saying that there's never going to be any crashes on the road. What it's saying is we don't accept that it should be a consequence of going to work, that you will be killed or seriously injured. So how can we collectively, and that's from everybody individually, communities, parish councils, city councils, county councils, fire and rescue, post-crash care through in the NHS, EMAS, how do we embed road safety into every single thread of what we do? And often in ways in which we wouldn't have thought. So if you're thinking as a borough council about creating hubs and hives of activity and safe spaces for people to flourish, well, how do we ensure that they do that safely without the threat of death and injury just because they cross the road to get to the park? And I think it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about the issue in Lincolnshire. And so that's something we're going to be looking very strongly into over the next 18 months, because our strategy finishes in 2025 and we'll be starting a new one. And I think the only way in which we can do that successfully, how we can get back to seeing year-on-year reductions, is for everybody to take responsibility for this issue, say we don't accept this anymore and we're going to make a change. So because of the very consequences that you've highlighted, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Steve, I found it interesting on page 59, the time of fatal collisions. It's an interesting statistic for me that more fatal collisions are occurring midday to early evening, with a peak between 12 and 1300. And I say that because many people would take a bit of waking up in the morning, to take a few coffees to get them woke up. They're probably not woke up until midday. Well, come late afternoon, evening time, they're starting feeling tired again, want to go to sleep. So I'd have thought that time of day people should have been at their most alert, quite honestly. So can you tell me what you think's happening there?
Thank you. It's often, silly as it sounds, one of the things that takes me longest to write in that document, simply because I can never make it make any sense. Because up until this year, every year, there'd been no clear pattern. That the times at which these collisions were occurring were distributed pretty evenly throughout the day. Generally more likely to be in the afternoon, but other than that, it was no clear pattern. And this was the first time where there was quite an obvious sort of spread where it peaked. And I don't know why that is. Once we've looked into the data and identified that, we now need to go through with the collision investigation team and see if there's any commonality in the ones that were happening at that time of day. But as I say, up until now, generally speaking, it will just be distributed throughout the most of the day when there's the highest volumes of traffic and then the highest potential for conflict. As to why specifically those couple of hours this year, I'm not sure at this time.
Okay, perhaps time might tell on that one then, Steve. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment, Stephen. I lived in Iceland for 6 years. If you are caught just with the smell of alcohol, you may lose your license for 3 years. And it's no appeal against that. You cannot say, oh, or anything. So you have to obey the rules. If they catch you without your driver license, you should have a number, which is you tell to the police, and then they can find out everything about you. So there is these strict rules where it makes things different. Unfortunately, I can see now in Britain, I think the rules are there, but nobody's implementing them. And that's where everything falls apart. And that's where the public lose their faith in the authorities, especially the police. And I think this is the main concern for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Steve, would you like to comment on that?
Just to say that I think I agree with you. There's the I mentioned before the safe system, and that every element needs to be done well. And if any of that fails, then of course that is going to have an impact on the whole of the road safety system. So I am really pleased to see the increase in roads policing officers that has occurred in Lincolnshire Police over the last 18 months. That's going to have a difference on the roads as people see that visible presence. I think it's a really simple equation. If you knew every time you got into your vehicle that if you exceeded the speed limit, it would be known to the police, you just wouldn't do it. Well, some people would, because there's always people out there who make some terrible decisions, but the vast majority of us simply wouldn't do it. Same for any of the other offences. If you knew that as soon as you had alcohol and got into your car, that the police would know about it, then you wouldn't do it. So you know, that might be virtually impossible when you think about the resource required to do something of that nature, or the automated systems that aren't available that would be needed to do that. But I think as a sliding scale, you go down to zero, and there's no risk of getting caught. What's to stop people doing it? You know, maybe not even as a you know, sort of proactive choice, but they just forget or they don't think about what they're doing. You know, so I think the more that we can add into the system in terms of enforcement, the bigger impact we can have on people's behaviours, and then the bigger impact we can have on road safety. So I do agree with everything you've said.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes all the questions. So thank you, councillors, for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of the item. And thank you, Steve, for providing us with every possible road safety statistic. There can't possibly be any more to look at. So thank you for that. I'm going to propose that the report of the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership be endorsed, that the committee expresses its satisfaction with the activity and service provision reported, and also request that our comments and suggestions made in relation to the updates we received today are taken under consideration by the relevant officers and the executive portfolio holder. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This is on pages 79 to 84 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara. The actions of the committee is that we're invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So without further ado, over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chiara Hadzianu, Scrutiny Officer designated for this committee. The committee's work programme is a living document that evolves and grows meeting after meeting and aims at developing meeting agendas that reflect on a wide variety of topics under the Public Protection and Communities umbrella. The aim is to ensure that the committee's agendas are reflective of contemporary matters and allows members to review existing and future work streams from a critical friend's viewpoint. As promised in the previous meeting, the work programme has now been updated and meeting agendas have been agreed up until the end of the calendar year, with a caveat of changes that may arise from a different and wide number of reasons, which could include the addition of new items and prioritisation. Any changes are and will be advised at subsequent meetings under this item. Moving on, I'd like to give you a taste of what follows in the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 9th of May 2023. In this meeting, we are due to receive a report on citizens' advice, which is going to be an annual overview of the service, and a report on Prevent, once again, an annual overview of delivery. Should members wish to see any other topics included in the work programme, please raise these now, or contact me offline for a discussion. And this concludes my update to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I see on the 25th of July, we've got item 5, refugee resettlement and asylum dispersal arrangements, 6 monthly update. I think there are a lot of people, a lot of councillors in this room are perhaps concerned about the proposals for Scampton. Personally, I'm concerned from the perspective of those people being properly supported, rather than everything else comes second to that to me. But I understand that everybody has different concerns. I mean, I'm concerned about the heritage of Scampton, of course, but I just think it's causing huge upset locally. And I would ask if something around that item can be brought to the next meeting of this council, and I'd seek a seconder in this room for that, please.
I'll go to Councillor Brockway first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chiara, your thoughts on that?
Yes, I will see that an interim update, whether verbal or in the version of a brief report, updating report, will be brought in the next meeting.
Chair, I would ask for something more than a brief report. I think it's really important, and I think it's something that we need a thorough report and a thorough discussion on. I think it's causing a lot of concern locally.
Would you agree, Councillor Brockway?
Councillor Brockway.
May I speak? Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, certainly. I'm on West Lindsey as well, and the shock horror around what's happening or being proposed for Scampton is actually huge. Okay. So if this council could, I'm not sure how we can be involved as a council, sure, because it's not our brief, but we certainly can be looking at it, and I would support that.
Okay, what about
I know it's not meant to be a two-way thing, but as I say, for me, it's about supporting those people as much as anything. Thank you.
Okay, we have the proposed by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Brockway. I take it we're all in favour? Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're all unanimous on that. Can I leave that with you, Chiara, to sort that out?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is something which was raised by a friend of mine who used to work for the police forces in London, is how many defibrillators we have around the county, because it takes minutes to save a life. So I found out that Boston Borough Council has one. There is, I think, the town centre we have two. HBC has one. NatWest has one. But I think we probably should be more implementing them in various areas, because they can save lives. And I would like to have a report on that and where they are in Lincoln, basically, if you come and visit Lincoln. So because it's a part, I think, of our protection or part of the public, I think they should know.
Okay, Chiara, your thoughts on that?
Happy to take that away and discuss this offline with officers and seek for an appropriate way to address this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chiara, I know to the May and June agendas look relatively light, particularly compared to September, which is really heavy by the looks of it, yeah. So we seem to have a bit of an anomaly there. I know we can't do a great deal about it because that's when they come in the course of events, but something to bear in mind if any of those could be brought forward at all from September.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That can be considered, but just a point of mindfulness, some of the reports that are going to be brought in September's meeting have been allocated to this meeting because of that being the best time for data to be extracted, for the reports to be informed. But I will liaise with officers and see how we can maintain a greater balance.
I'm aware of that. That's there. They come in the sequence, and that's the appropriate date for them. But it just shows an anomaly there between the other meetings. Yeah. Okay. Any further comments? Nope. Okay. So thank you for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of that particular item. I'll move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 75-78 and the additional item which we mentioned about that which Karen proposed. Councillor Brockway seconded, should have said Councillor Lee. And can I ask you to raise your hands if you agree with that? Okay, all agreed. Thank you. We now close this part of the meeting, and then we now sit as the Crime and Disorders Scrutiny Committee. I was minded to have a 5-minute break, but if it's okay with you all, I think we'll carry on, if that's okay. Just to say, the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee is established under Section 19 of the Crime and Justice Act 2006 to review or scrutinise decisions made or other action taken in connection with the discharge by the County Council of its crime and disorder functions. For today, we're looking at the Drug and Alcohol Core Priority Group report. And this can be found on pages 85-96 of the agenda pack. The report provides the committee with summary of work related to drug and alcohol misuse carried out by the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership in Lincolnshire during the course of 2022-2023 and the intentions for the coming year to ensure members are cited on these topics as a statutory duty. I'm told the report's going to be presented by Gemma Clark, who's on Teams, but I'm also told we're ably assisted by Lucy Gavins here. I'm not sure on your title, Lucy, so if you could help us out there, and over to you or Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm Lucy Gavins. I'm a consultant in public health here at Lincolnshire County Council. I sit within the public health team, and drugs and alcohol is one of my key areas of responsibility. I work really closely with Gemma, who is joining us online, but she's unfortunately poorly with COVID. So I'm going to take the lead on Gemma's behalf, and talk you through, and she may jump in a little bit later on if there are any specific questions.
We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Okay then, Lucy.
And a little bit of context, if I may, because I think this is really helpful. So in 2021, the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership conducted a strategic needs assessment, which was a big review of effectively all of our local intelligence around a range of activities across Lincolnshire in terms of kind of prevalence of crime, kind of community safety, fear of crime, a whole range of different factors that are important to the people of Lincolnshire. And that strategic needs assessment identified substance misuse, so thinking about drug use and alcohol use, as something which came up time and time again in that work, and so something which we thought should be a priority in Lincolnshire, given the impact of drug use or alcohol use on a whole range of criminal justice and health outcomes across the county. So the drug and alcohol CPG, the core priority group, was established in summer 2022 to progress work in this priority area, and it's accountable to the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership Strategy Board. Around about the same time, informed by the Dame Carol Black review, which was a national review of drugs, From Harm to Hope was launched in November 2021 as a national drug strategy for the UK. It's a 10-year plan to cut crime and save lives by reducing the supply of and demand for drugs and delivering a high-quality treatment and recovery system. So it's got that two parts to it, if you like. It's the focus on breaking drug supply chains and achieving sort of a generational shift in the demand for drugs, but also simultaneously delivering a world-class treatment and recovery system to support those people who are experiencing harm from their drug use. In summer of last year, so at the same time that we were launching our drug and alcohol CPG for Lincolnshire, we were asked by national government to establish a combating drugs partnership as a partnership to deliver that national strategy at a local level. And we decided that we would use our core priority group as a dual function group effectively, because we already had the right colleagues around the table. So in Lincolnshire, we have our drug and alcohol CPG, and it doubles up as the Combating Drugs Partnership, which reports back to national government on behalf of Lincolnshire. And it's made up of a range of relevant stakeholders. So the full list is in the report, but some of our key stakeholders, for example, Lincolnshire County Council, we've got colleagues from a number of different departments within the council, Lincolnshire Police, the Police and Crime Commissioner, local treatment providers, both the specialist treatment provider and the recovery service, district colleagues, LPFT is the Mental Health Trust, the Integrated Care Board. So we've got a wide range of partners who sit around that table. We first met in September last year and have met twice since then. And the overall aim of our partnership is to reduce drug and alcohol related harm through a comprehensive package of prevention and treatment activity that spans the whole range of partners involved in the work. We focus on early intervention and prevention in areas of greatest deprivation, where we know that people are more likely to experience harm, a range of harms from drug and alcohol use. We make sure that there are sufficient support services available across the county, and work holistically with partners across different sectors. So, for example, thinking about housing, about social care, and other important services that we need to collaborate with closely to achieve a positive outcome for individuals, for families and friends, and for wider communities. And over time, what we hope is that by kind of our comprehensive package of work, fewer people will use drugs and fewer people will experience harm from drugs or alcohol use, as well as us having a good range of services in place to support behaviour change in those people that do need specialist support to overcome harmful drinking or drug use. So since we first launched in September last year, we've had quite a rapid programme of work. We started off by looking at a number of local needs assessments that had already been completed in the previous year. So things like we have a drug market profile for Lincolnshire, we have our joint strategic needs assessment, which has a chapter on drugs and alcohol across all ages, as well as the strategic needs assessment I mentioned earlier. And those analyses pulled together have informed our delivery plan, which we launched in January. The delivery plan, which focuses on this calendar year, has got 6 key areas of work. One, which which is quite new, and I'll kind of briefly go through all 6, but then I'd like to come back to the prevention plan after I've kind of given you an overview. So the first is to develop and implement an all-age prevention programme of work across Lincolnshire for drugs and alcohol. That includes both what we would call a universal offer, so something that's around kind of awareness raising for the whole population of Lincolnshire, making sure that everyone understands things like some of the harms of different drugs, where to access support, but also a targeted offer that makes sure we focus additional prevention support on areas that we've identified as being at greatest need. Perhaps because they experience more harm from alcohol that could be criminal justice related, could be health related, often a combination of both. The second key area of work for us is around making sure we've got really clear and well-functioning referral pathways. So we have our specialist drug and alcohol treatment service, we have a recovery service. We need to make sure that partners supporting individuals across the whole of Lincolnshire in a range of different areas understand how to support someone into that service. You can self-refer, but we do find as well that often colleagues who are working out in the community might come across someone at the point at which they're what we might call a teachable moment, a moment where they are ready for change or they'd like to be signposted into some support. So we try and make the most of those opportunities to connect people into the service. And one of the things that we're really proud of in Lincolnshire is that we don't run a waiting list for our service. So if you're referred in, you'll be contacted really quickly and be able to access that support quickly. Our third area is around improving our intelligence. So there's a huge amount of data that supports us to understand what the need is across Lincolnshire in terms of drugs and alcohol. There are a number of different organisations that collect data that's a different piece of the puzzle, if you like. So LPFT, Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust, as the Mental Health Trust, has quite a lot of information that can be really helpful for us in supporting someone who's using drugs or alcohol in a harmful way. Similarly, there may be some data that the police have or that probation have that we can use to help connect people in and make sure we keep them in services. And a whole range of other organisations hold data and work with people who might benefit from our services locally, but who aren't necessarily linked in at the moment. So sharing data in a proportionate and appropriate way to make sure that we've got the best offer available for Lincolnshire is a real key priority as well. The fourth area is around understanding locally our recent drug-related deaths, to identify lessons that could be learned, things that we could do differently to prevent future drug-related deaths. There are some key actions within our prevention programme of work as well that we're just developing that link into that. So, for example, the rollout of something called naloxone, which works to reverse opioid overdoses. So there are a range of things that we are putting in place to prevent future drug-related deaths. The fifth area, is around improving access to drug and alcohol treatment through the criminal justice system. So through our partnership, we work really closely with the police, with prisons, with probation, to make sure that we are connecting people into support for drug and alcohol related problems as soon as possible. Where people are in prison, that we, on them being released, that we can support them straight away and understand their needs before they're released so that we can support them well within the community on release. So that there's quite a big area of work that goes on there kind of across the criminal justice system. And then just finally, the national drug strategy is very focused on drugs, on illicit drugs. But we know that in Lincolnshire, almost 9 out of 10 adults drink alcohol. We have an estimated 7,000 adults dependent on alcohol. 1 in 5 people drink above the Chief Medical Officer's kind of low-risk drinking guidelines, and 1 in 6 people binge drink. So we know that lots of people are drinking in a way that could be harmful to their health, that may lead them to get involved in the criminal justice system. And so what we want to do locally is make sure that, as well as responding to that national drug strategy, that we've got a really robust local strategy that covers both drugs and alcohol, also recognising that a lot of people that use one use both. So that's our 6 key areas of work within the delivery plan. And then just coming back to prevention, if I can, because I think this is one of those areas that is that we are putting a lot of focus on at the moment. So we have established a prevention task and finish group, which is led by Public Health in collaboration with colleagues from Community Safety. And the idea is to develop an all-age drug and alcohol prevention approach. So what we're looking at here is, ideally, prevention and early prevention is putting in place measures to stop a problem from ever developing through things like education, awareness raising, modifying environments. So there are things that we can do in the nighttime economy around drinking environments, and also through things around national government legislation as well, which obviously which we look to national government on. Some of the current considerations within the Prevention Task and Finish group are around, I mentioned naloxone, so they're around exploring evidence-based harm reduction and treatment interventions. As well as naloxone, there are things like needle and syringe programs, which are a well-evidenced harm reduction program that we do have across Lincolnshire, and then also talking therapies and some kind of psychosocial and pharmacological, so medical interventions. We do a lot of work with children and young people through school-based prevention and early interventions. Stay Safe programme is kind of our flagship approach within Lincolnshire. And we're just looking at the moment as to how we can work with Stay Safe, with schools and with the service to put more bespoke and specialist support in place, prevention support in place for children and young people who might benefit from a bit more targeted, tailored support than they get through those, what we would call universal Stay Safe days. And there are also some key risk groups that we know we have in Lincolnshire where, and there are cross-cutting themes here across other areas of the SLP's work, for example, women and girls and particular minority groups who we know experience more harm from drugs and alcohol as well, so tailoring some of our prevention work to those communities. So just in summary, the core priority group has made, it feels like quite good progress to date given we established in September. We've kind of set up and we've got good representation from appropriate partners across the county. We've conducted our needs assessment and we've developed a delivery plan. And at the moment, we're just focusing on developing a set of local performance measures to make sure we've got a really good understanding of being able to track progress against what we're trying to achieve as close to real time as possible. We've got some momentum at the moment and we're trying to harness that to drive progress locally to reduce drug and alcohol related harms for individuals, for families and friends and for the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we any questions? Councillor Brockway.
Thank you ever so much. I always think this is very scary stuff actually. It must be horrendous for the individuals and their families who are suffering with these problems. There were two things I wanted to ask you quickly, please. On page 92, it talks about the treatment engagement, and the treatment engagement, and particularly the treatment completion, is actually not very high yet. But we talk about around 11% of the estimated number of adults who are alcohol dependent. What do we base that estimate on? Because alcoholism and drug use are notoriously secretive. So how would you get that assessment of numbers? That's my first. Do you want to do it separately? Yeah, thanks.
There is a quite well-established national programme of research, because you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to know if we go out and ask people. There are all sorts of reasons why they might not declare, and also the methods that we might use to try and understand whether or not someone was dependent on drugs would tend to be kind of survey-based, and we know that a lot of people who are dependent on drugs may not, or they're much less likely to respond to surveys. So what we use instead, it's an estimate, and it is an estimate, but it's based on a number of factors which we know indicate likely dependence. So it's things like hospital admissions for specific conditions which are very, very closely related to the number of alcohol dependents. So it will be things like alcoholic liver cirrhosis, which is very kind of closely linked to drinking, and we use that to estimate effectively what we're looking at is the tip of an iceberg. And there's a range of others. There's about 15 or 20 indicators that are used to generate that estimate. But they do seem to, it does seem to be reasonably good at estimating what our local need is. And those estimates have been around for about 10 years now, updated every couple of years.
Thank you. May I go my second?
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Chairman. You talk also in the section on morbidity and mortality about Lincolnshire having significantly more road traffic accident casualties with failed breath test than the England average. So my question is going to be what you mean by significantly more. But actually, if you look at the bullet points around that statement, it's really interesting because you would think you need to read them and look at them because they don't seem to tally. They do. I'm not saying that the report is wrong or anything like that, but you would expect other figures to be high to match, and they don't. There's lots of subtleties within the presentation of these problems, and I don't know how you get on top of it, actually. But my question, therefore, is that the mortality is... hang on, that's right. Sorry, Chairman, I'm thinking while I'm saying and getting it all round my neck here. Lincolnshire's got significantly more road traffic accident casualties with failed breast tests. What does significantly more mean? But if you look at the next bullet point, alcohol-specific mortality is significantly lower than the England average. So I was very curious about those things. So my question is about the significantly more. Sorry about that convoluted question. It's the end of the morning.
You're okay. Carry on.
Yeah, no problem at all. What I will probably suggest actually is we could just send a paragraph around afterwards that unpicks that a little bit more. But the way that we capture alcohol-specific and alcohol-related deaths, if I can give a couple of examples, so an alcohol-specific death would be something that wouldn't have happened without the alcohol being consumed. So something like alcoholic liver disease is an alcohol-specific death because in the absence of that person drinking alcohol, they would not have died from the liver disease. Whereas an alcohol-related death is something where alcohol is perhaps a causal factor. So we know that in a certain proportion of deaths from cardiovascular disease, alcohol contributes to those deaths. So that's the sort of subtlety between them. But also, coming back to the road traffic accidents, a lot of this as well links to the environment. So because I suppose Lincolnshire is a large rural county, people are more likely to get slightly, if you compare it to a city where people can get around more easily on foot or by public transport, we tend to see lower rates of road traffic fatalities in kind of more built up areas. But I'd be really happy to just maybe send around a couple of paragraphs just unpicking that a little bit more so that you've got it if it would be helpful to come back to.
Okay, thank you. We've got Councillor Danny next, followed by Councillor Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, alcohol is a very, I think, it's a very interesting topic, and especially during our lives, we will meet people who drinks excessively or people who takes drugs. And the one thing is in common between these people is they can use any excuse or lies just to get to what they want, and that's the difficult one. The second thing which is difficult is when you tell to someone that you should be concerned about the consumption of alcohol, especially when they tell you, you know what, I just drink 2 beers or 3 glasses of wine before I go to sleep. Can you do that? You know, can you go to sleep without drinking every night? Oh, no, I'm just having fun. And this is for me, because it's difficult to convince a person to go and seek attention. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's around 4.5 million a year around the world died because of alcohol-related drinks. Now, I will come to the things which is concern me in my community, is we have off-licenses who are selling alcohol 5 o'clock in the morning. They're selling it on midnight. And I think this is probably the issues where we have to look at and try to reduce that, because, I mean, if we go to High Street in Boston, from the High Street and going to Town Centre, is plenty of off-licenses, one after one. And all of them, they are open until 1 o'clock, midnight, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know what we can do, but I know what we can do. We should put more pressure on them and regulate the opening hours so we can reduce drinking. Also, the police, I think, and the local authorities should probably use more presence to reduce people gathering in specific places for drinking, because it's give them just this trampoline. I can drink anywhere, we can gather, we can have fun. And this is my concerns about the community. Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this highlights why I briefly mentioned before the importance of a range of measures to support kind of reducing alcohol and drug-related harm. And there is no one simple solution, and there is something about the drinking environment as much as anything, and that can be nighttime economy, it can be the availability of alcohol kind of 24/7 through off licenses, and we do have reasonably good evidence based on what works to reduce harm. But there is also a challenge around culture and the acceptability of drinking. We know that there are one of the challenges that we focus on or are thinking about at the moment is the rise in middle-aged, middle-class drinking, which tends to be quite hidden. Some drinking harms particularly are quite evident because they happen out and about in communities, in the nighttime economy, kind of fights on the streets, brawls, etc., etc. But actually there's a lot of longer-term health harm particularly that's quite hidden because people drink at home and they drink the 2 or 3 glasses of wine every day and struggle to have a day off. So there's a whole, this is why we need such a wide range of activities really, and to work together as a system and with national government around drug and alcohol related harm.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It's not a question, but it's just the funny bit. I think even advertising, it makes it worse because when you have your birthday, you need to drink. Mother's Day, you need to drink. Oh, Christmas, you need to drink. Oh, Easter, you need to drink. Oh, you're going out, you need to drink. So it becomes that kind of culture pinned in your brain that you have to drink for every occasion. And that's, I think, what we should use some rubber and take it out of the heads of people, because that will make it worse even for the youth. Thank you.
Okay, you forgot Pancake Day there. But here we've got next. Councillor Mrs Clark, followed by Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lucy. I was reading a few reports that within this report this week, and it's really eye-opening. And I'm pleased to see, actually, that we're looking at preventative and not criminalising it in the same way. So it becomes a health issue as opposed to a crime issue, but it is a crime issue if it gets out of hand. And what struck me, and has probably struck a few people also within this scrutiny panel, is that maybe we'd forgotten about alcohol and it was slipping off the radar, because we're talking about addictions, aren't we, as well? So it's getting education out there about addictions, and alcohol is one of those. And Councillor Dan is quite right. You know, it's become very acceptable to use alcohol for celebration and all those sorts of things. So what I want to ask you is the cost of smoking and alcohol, does that vastly outweigh the cost of care for the use of Class A drugs? Because we have a drug issue. So one must cost more than the other. Are you finding that there's a difference there, a large difference there in that, and how we care for people? And also, are the police changing their approach towards crime around drugs? For instance, would they cease actively pursuing cannabis users and small-scale growers? Because really it's not worth it. We're looking at preventative health measures now for people who are using alcohol. Thank you.
So I'll just pick up the second point first and then the first. I think it is, there are, through the criminal justice system, we now have an increasing number of options to be able to use to divert someone from perhaps a custodial sentence, or even kind of being charged with a crime. We kind of have other referral pathways that we can use now for drugs and alcohol, and also for mental health as well, because there's a huge crossover between people who have poor mental health, use drugs and alcohol, and find themselves involved in criminal activity. So where appropriate now, we are working really closely, and the police work really closely with health and with other providers to try and divert people who shouldn't be going to prison, but who would benefit from a really focused treatment pathway that hopefully means they'll be able to kind of overcome their addiction, any mental ill health problems they have will be well managed, and that we aren't criminalising people who have really poor health that's impacting on their behaviour. Obviously, notwithstanding the fact that if people are committing crimes and it's persistent, that we do have to also manage that within the criminal justice system. I think that's also why it's so important that within prisons, where people do end up in prison, we've got good health services available, good drug and alcohol treatment services, good mental health support, so that we can support people through their time in custody and then back out into communities. Just thinking about cost, the overall cost of harms? It's a good question, and I actually don't know the answer. I do know that quite a while ago, and we're probably talking at least 10 years ago, there was a piece of work done by a national group where they were looking at the cost to the individual, to family and friends, and to wider society of use of a whole range of different substances, including tobacco, including alcohol, including opioids, cannabis, etc. And there they found that the overall cost to society was likely to be highest from alcohol because it's so socially acceptable, because so many people drink. So it's very difficult to make direct comparisons because the number of people, for example, that smoke cannabis or use cocaine or heroin are very, very small in comparison. But we do know that there are lots of harm to others from alcohol. For example, harms to children who perhaps don't get what they need from their parents, harms to families where people are spending lots of money on a drink and therefore not getting other kind of essential items. So it is a really interesting question. I can't answer directly, but I suspect the cost would be really high.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering if there could be some, I know you've got a lot to do, but some information around that. You've got your task and finish group. I probably should have used the word impact as opposed to cost, but I'm thinking also about the impact then on an already groaning National Health Service, with all of this coming on. And the other thing I wanted to ask as well was, how are the schools reacting? Because you're going to obviously take it into schools, aren't you? It's the natural place to start. And it's so sad that it has to be introduced so early into primary school, I would imagine, thinking about that. How well are the schools coping with that? And what kind of impact is that having on children? Are there some, you did mention there are some children who maybe would benefit from more, maybe one-to-one or more sensitive help. How well is that being received? And do you know the pinch points where that is? Across Lincolnshire, are there particular pinch points there that you will be focusing on? Thank you.
So, just to pick up the first point, yeah, absolutely, we'll have a look at that, and we'll share something. I know that there is national evidence, at least, that's work that's been done to understand what the impacts are across society from different substances. So we'll pick that up and share it in a summary form. Schools have been brilliant. So the Stay Safe days, schools are given the offer and they can kind of choose to accept it or not. But I know that the Stay Safe team get booked up really early on. And that alcohol and drug session that's age appropriate, so delivered to a couple of different year groups, is really well received. We've had, we do offer follow-up work. So within Lincolnshire, we've got our specialist drug and alcohol service. Within that, there is a young person's service that is bespoke, separate, kind of trained advisors who work specifically with children and young people. And where a school has concerns, that the service will offer to go in and do kind of an assembly or drop-in sessions. So, if there are, trying to create the space for any young person who needs a conversation with somebody, perhaps that's to get some specialist advice, just get some guidance around drugs and alcohol, so that we can build up that relationship between the school and the service, so that they can work together to offer that for young people where it's needed. And I know that they do go into to a small number of schools, but obviously the offer is there and open for others to make contact. So I would say schools do respond to it really well. One of the things that we do is we can look at school exclusion rates, particularly looking at temporary exclusions, to try and understand whether if there are schools that perhaps have had more exclusions due to alcohol or drug use as well, then we'll make that proactive offer to go out and run some more specialist kind of sessions, so that we've got that targeted approach alongside the universal Stay Safe offer.
Okay, I think I've got Councillor Lee next, followed by Councillor Mr Clark.
Yeah, thanks. I'm pleased you mentioned smoking tobacco, because I've been a nurse for 20 years and I've seen far more damage to health from tobacco and alcohol than I have And I do see damage because of drugs, because people get endocarditis and spend weeks on IV antibiotics. But, you know, so I think smoking's hugely harmful as well. You know, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think it's ironic that governments of every colour take revenue in form of tax from the use of those harmful substances, and I think that's utterly wrong, but that's where we are. I wanted to ask a question. As a councillor, I'm concerned that the number of contacts, it's not a massive thing, but I am getting more contacts that connect with the use of drugs, be it about people finding syringes on the green somewhere, or at the co-op they've got a security guard because there's lots more crime, and they think that the security guard tells me that he thinks that's drug related. You know, all those kinds of things. So I'd like to find out more about what you're doing in my particular area, you know, what your activity is, and I wondered if is it appropriate for me to contact you and ask about that. As I say, I'm not saying people don't go away and think there's a massive problem where I live, but it's just I'm noticing it more, and I'd like to know more about it and what you're doing to tackle it, and there might be something that I can do to help with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to pick up a conversation offline, because I think also as we're developing our prevention activities, the more local intelligence we can get around where hotspots might be, that we can do some of that targeted work, that would be really helpful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's a question regarding the complexities that you have to deal with and the people under treatment. Are you able to tell us the numbers that go into a specialist unit to receive treatment, and how many people just do a sort of a therapy session without being committed to a unit? And again, to sort of, do we know the success rate? I know previously we've been told that there have been real fluctuations in the success rate, particularly on alcohol, in trying to get people off being dependent on it. Thank you.
So there's a number of different dimensions to this. So the specialist service offers a wide range of activities. So some of it will be one-to-one kind of counselling, psychosocial therapy for lots of people, particularly heroin users, methadone as a substitute drug. So there's often a medicinal element to it. We do offer what's called inpatient detoxification. So if someone's wanting or would benefit from a short stay in a specialist unit to help them come off a drug or alcohol, then we do offer that. And we do also, there is the option for residential rehabilitation, but the exact kind of treatment pathway is decided between the individual and their key worker. Often there's been kind of fluctuations over time in the use of residential rehab, particularly, and how well that works. It can be less successful for alcohol, because one of the advantages of going into residential rehab is that you're removed from your environment, particularly if you're using illicit drugs. You're removed from your environment, and you might be settled somewhere in a totally new community afterwards, and so you've kind of broken that connection to your original contacts. For alcohol, it's obviously much more difficult because alcohol is everywhere, and there's been quite a big move in recent years towards kind of community-based treatment to support people to overcome their addiction, live with kind of some of live with their addiction, because for a lot of people that doesn't ever, the cravings and the challenges don't ever go away in community where they're going to spend the rest of their lives. So we would often find that people would go to residential rehab and then relapse quite quickly when they came out, because as soon as they were back in that former environment. So we do use residential rehab, we do use inpatient detox, but we try and do as much as we can in the community, because that's where we can teach people kind of strategies and coping mechanisms that they'll use for the rest of their lives.
Thank you for that. Do you find that you manage to get the families to try and support the individuals, or does it become something where someone is totally isolated?
It's really, it can be really varied. Lots of people do get support from family and friends. One of the things we try to do within the recovery service in Lincolnshire as well is support people to build new social networks and new kind of support networks with others who have gone through a similar experience. So recognising the importance of that social connectedness and social support for successful recovery, there'll be a balance between where that comes from, family, friends, kind of people that they've met through the service.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, you mentioned naloxone in your report, and if I've got that right, that's the antidote stuff, isn't it?
Yes, so it kind of it can help to reverse an opioid overdose.
Yeah, I've actually seen it used in practice, and it's quite remarkable in a short space of time from someone being sort of unconscious out of it to being fully complimentous in a short space of time. So I'm pleased to see the training that being used in Lincolnshire and can potentially save someone's life. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Dunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just because we talk about the schools, it's a great idea to work with the schools. And I think because you mentioned that if the schools, they want it, it can happen. However, saying that, I think we should push the schools to adopt what you can offer them, because it's from the young age you can, teach kids, because there's a lot of predators around there selling drugs to kids in schools. And we have to fight that also. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We do do quite a bit of proactive work with certain schools, especially if they perhaps don't take up an offer at the first ask, just to kind of try and understand concerns and what some of the barriers might be. And I know that colleagues in the police do a lot of work with schools as well, particularly where there are concerns around things like county lines, where vulnerable children might get pulled into and that kind of drug distribution network. So, yeah.
Okay, I see no further councillors wishing to speak, so I'm going to thank you for your questions and comments, councillors, and also thank you to you, Lucy, for your presentation. This now concludes the discussion of the item. I've not had any indication from Gemma that she wishes to speak, so I guess she's happy with what's been said. So I'm going to propose that we endorse the report and record our satisfaction on the activities undertaken that demonstrates the efforts of the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership to discharge its statutory duties in combating drug and alcohol misuse in our county. And I request that our feedback and comments from the debate to be taken under consideration by the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership officers and portfolio holders. Members, can you please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you, that's clearly agreed. That now brings us to the end of the meeting. It concludes the business of the meeting, so thank you everyone for your attendance. You may now leave the council chamber. Thank you.